Oh, no, I sort of know that one.
Okay, we're on the air. Welcome to Palo Parks and Rec. This is February 24th, our regular meeting. The general public, We have copies, hard copies of all the presentation materials in the back, along with comment cards. If anyone from the general public wants to discuss anything on the agenda or outside the agenda, please fill out a comment card and hand it down to Catherine here on my left. Okay, so first is roll call.
Keith Rechtel,
Here.
Pat Markovich, Ed Lowing,
Here.
Jennifer Hedderly,
Here.
Stacy Ashland, Deidre Cromie, Abby Knopper,
Here.
Eric Filsell.
Okay, next item is agenda changes, requests, deletions. Does anyone have any modifications they want?
There we
Okay, if not, we'll move on to number 3, oral communications. I have one card from David Carnahan. Okay, David, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Reckdahl and Commissioners. I'm David Carnahan, Deputy City Clerk, here to talk to you about commission recruitment. Currently, the city is looking to fill terms on the Human Relations Commission, 3 terms on the HRC, 3 terms on the Public Art Commission, and 2 terms on the Utilities Advisory Commission. Terms on all 3 commissions run for 3 years, from May 1st of this year through April 30th of 2018. The deadline to apply is March 3rd. I'm coming to all the boards and commissions in hopes that commission members know people that they could refer for application, as well as members of the public that attend meetings and watch from home may be interested. These are great opportunities for members of the community to give back to their community and help shape the future of Palo Alto. There are a few specific requirements for each board and commission. For HRC, the Human Relations Commission, you need to be a Palo Alto resident. For the Utilities Advisory Commission, each member needs to be a utilities customer or, thank you, or a representative of a utilities customer. Did you guys hear any of that? Okay, good. For public art, it's a bit of a mouthful. There's really no concise way to say this, so I'm just going to read it to you. The requirements to be on the Public Art Commission: members shall either be members of the Architectural Review Board or shall be professional visual artists, visual arts educators, professional visual arts scholars, or visual arts collectors whose authorities and skills are known and respected in the community, and whenever feasible, who have demonstrated an interest in and have participated in the arts program of the city. You also do not need to be a Palo Alto resident to serve on the Public Art Commission. So again, applications for all 3 commissions are due on March 3rd. We have applications at the back of the chambers. They're also available online. And if there are any questions, someone can please contact the clerk's office. Does the commission have any questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, before we move on to new business, this probably should be an announcement at the end, but I'll move it up. Congratulate our liaison, Rob DeGos, on his new position. He's now head of community services. So we appreciate that.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated. It's an honor and a privilege. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, move on to business. The first is approval of draft minutes. Does any commissioners have comments or corrections?
Yeah, on the, let's see, page 55, the middle starting at 275, there's kind of a general point here, I think, is that in this case, I was quoting from documents, and since we're now doing verbatim minutes, we should probably use the words out loud quote when we're starting to talk about a piece of a document, and then end quote, which sounds a little bit formal, but it gets quite discombobulated here. So on the second line, number 276, that should have been sort of quote findings capitalized, because at that point I was commenting on a document that was findings. On line 278, I think it said we're already doing that, not we're always doing that. And then skipping over down on page, on line 289, starting with to make, it's also in quotes because I was quoting a line from the document that was not understandable. So quote, to make it more productive as a more specialized down to 291 facilities, quote. on page 60, line 475, it's the same issue. That sentence says the next page, which is, quote, needs, opportunities, and challenges, quote. Again, I know it sounds formal, but it makes it kind of confusing if you're reading the minutes and you're not realizing that it's a reference to a document. That's all.
I think that's a good idea. Anyone else? Okay, no other comments? We have a move to accept the minutes.
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? One abstain. Commissioner Ashland was not here last week. Okay, so we're going to move on. Number 2 is the Junior Museum. John Aiken is here.
So we'll invite John Aiken up here and team, and let me just introduce John. John's the director of the Palo Alto Junior Museum and Zoo, and I have to say, one of the great things about becoming director of the department is I get to be involved in some areas where I haven't been involved as much recently, and the Junior Museum and Zoo is an example of that. It's such a great program. When is the last time the commissioners have been to the Junior Museum and Zoo? Pretty recently. You've got to go back. John and team are doing a great job there. It's fantastic. It's a treasure of a place for the community, and it's bursting at the seams, and it has been for some time. So I'm excited to have John here to talk about what could be in the future for this wonderful program. So with that, let me pass it on to John.
Thank you, Rob, for that wonderful. I have to push. There we go. Thank you, Rob, for that wonderful introduction. Commissioners, I'm pleased to be here to bring you up to speed with something that we've been planning for a couple of years. The Friends of the Junior Museum and Zoo have been fundraising and helping the city come up with concepts for what this could be. But it didn't become an official city project until a letter of intent was authorized by the council, or I guess the end of the last fiscal year. And so this is our first opportunity to really come to you formally and bring this project forward. So I'm very excited to do it. I'd like to introduce the members of the team here: Sarah Vaccaro from Cody Anderson Wozni Architects here in Palo Alto, and Peter Jensen, I think you know, our landscape architect. I'm going to let Peter set the context for this in terms of the master plan.
In association with the Junior Museum and Zoo project, this was an aspect of the Rinconada Long Range Plan, which you haven't heard about in a little while, as far as the expanding footprint of the Junior Museum and Zoo building and zoo itself that was shown in the Long Range Plan. That project itself, the Rinconada Long Range Plan, is in a joint, I guess, venture with the Junior Museum and Zoo as far as getting its environmental work done. So the recommendations that were part of the long range plan, they're basically now, along with the Junior Museum and Zoo, being reviewed as far as an environmental review goes. So that's how these two projects are kind of joined together. The long range plan did show the basically expanded footprint of the Junior Museum and Zoo in there. It was shown at several community meetings and discussed about the expansion, the future expansion of the Junior Museum and Zoo. No public opposition came to light from those meetings, and I don't imagine that they will. As Rob said, it is kind of a cherished item in Palo Alto. The Junior Museum and Zoo is a really beloved building and the zoo itself. So that's how then it connects to the long range plan, and those two things and the environmental work are basically going along together. So without further ado, then I'll turn it back to John and the consultant and talk more about the Junior Museum and Zoo itself.
Great, thank you, Peter. If we'll turn to your screens, our mission is to engage a child's curiosity in science, to build to encourage exploration and build a foundation for understanding and lifelong respect for nature. And we chose this wisely because it's really about their curiosity that they bring, science as a process and nature as the phenomena that we want to engage them in. We've been here a long time. We're celebrating our 80th year for the museum and the 40th year for the zoo. We are a hybrid institution that is part school, part zoo, part museum, but very much part of the community. I think part of that is that we are in a residential neighborhood. We've been free for a long time for people to stop by, and it has really meshed us well in the community. We have about 150,000 visits a year. That's not really visitors, that's the number of visits. We don't collect admission, and so this is an estimate based on nose counts throughout the year. All of them are local. Many of them are repeat visitors, and they're all children 0 to 9 years of age, and they're caretakers. We have a second demographic that we serve. We have probably one of the greatest outreach programs that I'm aware of. And this outreach program, we provide science education in our local elementary schools, and we're touching 100% of the local elementary schools, but we have robust contracts with at least 70% where we're doing every grade, every child, every science curriculum. And these are amazing programs, lots of hours with the students, many students served, and the Friends support at-risk neighborhood schools pro bono, so they raise the funds and deploy city staff to teach those classes in East Palo Alto and now in Mountain View. When people stop by, this is all about play for a young child, but we've staged that play thoughtfully with exhibits that engage them in scientific phenomena and use their whole bodies and get them to observe, question, and open their minds to exploration. And from there, it's the school work, or it's coming back and taking classes to learn more, but that stage is all set in the institution. We've been there for a long time. This building was built in 1941, and it no longer really reflects the scale of our audience, nor our storage needs, our staff needs. I'll go through a few of the issues. Parking conditions are pretty challenging. Let me get back to that. This is actually our relationship with the park, which I think could be much better. I think there could be an entrance to that park that's more inviting. The zoo has turned its back on the park with a USDA required fence, and I think that we can do a much better job of having a presence in the park. The parking lot is laid out in a confusing manner, I think is dangerous, and I kind of cringe as I watch kids and moms watch across that every day. We're crowded on busy days to the point where on rainy days we take cell phone numbers to call moms waiting in their cars because we don't have enough room in the institution. We're chock full of storage places, and we have great people that take wonderful care of our animals, but we can do much more if we build new facilities that reflect modern husbandry practices and modern zoo conditions. We have about 8,000 objects about 4,000 objects in our collections, and we've been Palo Alto's attic for a long time. We've got a lot of interesting things. Some of them meet our mission very well and are important to our teaching. Some of them don't, and we're in a process of cataloging those, but they need to be housed in accordance with the standards established by the American Alliance for Museums, and so this rebuild should allow us to do that. Where are those outreach programs that are so phenomenal are ultimately limited by storage space and our ability to deploy teachers. And so this is the mothership that allows that to occur. So I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Vaccaro now, who will walk you through the current plans.
Hello, Commissioners. Thank you for having us here tonight. Peter, thank you for setting the stage in terms of the long-range plan, and John, thank you for setting the stage of what this treasured amenity is in the city of Palo Alto, as well as the needs, the facility needs in order to grow and make this program even more able to reach more in the community. I want to set the stage with the existing facilities to begin with. This is the existing site plan. The existing museum building is shown in the dark gray. The existing zoo footprint is shown in the light gray. This overlays the Rinconada Park boundary. So Rinconada Park, along with Lucy Stern and the Junior Museum and Zoo, sit in one large public facility parcel a part of this parcel is zoned as parkland, the Rinconada Park. The current zoo sits mostly within parkland, so the zoological program is an approved and existing use within Rinconada Park, and we'll circle back on that in a few minutes. This diagram shows the existing heritage trees and special trees around the Junior Museum and Zoo. The red trees are heritage redwoods. The dark blue are heritage oak trees. And then there are two special trees that are highlighted with a green graphic. One is the Dawn redwood tree, which is a special deciduous redwood tree, and then a large pecan that outdates most of the buildings on this site. And so all of the heritage trees will be protected with this proposed expansion, as well as these two specimen trees will be highlighted as features in the proposed plan. As John mentioned earlier, the existing vehicular circulation in the parking lot is confusing, as these arrows indicate. And there are a lot of collision opportunities between pedestrians and vehicles in this current organization. So part of the long-range plan, as well as working with our team, we're trying to reorganize the parking lot to be much safer and clearer, as well as provide additional parking spots. This diagram in the dark blue or purple color shows the proposed expanded building footprint for the new museum. It is about 5,000 square feet larger than the existing footprint, and that is for the reasons that John outlined before of providing expanded storage capacity, as well as education spaces and visitor amenity spaces. The blue outline here shows the proposed expanded zoo footprint. As I mentioned, it is mostly entirely in parkland, in line with providing only zoological program in the parkland, which is in line with the existing zoo program currently in park. The proposed expanded footprint is about 11,000 square feet further into the park than the existing zoo footprint. As Peter mentioned before, the expanded museum and zoo footprint have both been identified in the long-range master plan and coordinated with the overall design of this end of the park, coordinated with the other amenities that are located here. This diagram shows some of the immediate trees that will be affected with this proposed expansion in the orange color. There are about 10 to 12 trees in the area immediately surrounding the existing building and zoo, excuse me, that will be affected and need to be removed. This is in the context of the entire larger long-range plan. There's about over 300 trees on the site. These few trees around the JMZ, as well as other trees on the site, have been identified. There's about 50 to be removed, and then over 70, close to 78 trees that are proposed to be planted in the long-range master plan. And then this is the proposed site plan. The darker blue color shows the proposed building locations. So we have the museum building on the lower side of the screen. It circles around that Dawn redwood tree, creating an educational courtyard and a nice entrance plaza off of the drop-off zone of the parking lot. This site plan shows the proposed reconfigured parking lot, which has been developed in coordination with Peter and his team. The light blue color shows the proposed outdoor zoo enclosure. This will be a netted enclosed area, so it'll be kind of a loose in the zoo concept where birds and animals will be able to roam freely, as well as other animals that'll be in enclosed exhibits. There is a small proposed zoo support building that is located in the park. This will provide support such as animal care and feeding rooms and other quarantine type spaces to allow for proper husbandry care for the animals. And then the lightest blue is an exterior back of house support area for the zoo as well. One thing to note in this plan is that we are proposing a public restroom on the back side, on the park side. of the proposed zoo building, and this will be able to be accessed from the park and serve as a public amenity on this end of Rinconada Park, as there's currently no public restrooms. I think that's it for this time.
If I could just kind of wrap it up and say that we have a few other drawings here we could ask questions, but we wanted to target this informational session to you, to issues that we thought were pertinent to park planning and stuff, and not get into zoo design and museum design and things like that. But if you have questions, we have a few more slides we can get to. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioners, comments or questions? Commissioner Knopper.
Thank you for your presentation. Could you just explain, so you have the proposed zoo footprint and then the proposed zoo building, and then there's a gray area that sits underneath it? I can't point. Yes. What is that?
It's an exterior zoo support area, so there'll be some cages for animals that need to be moved in and out of the main exhibit spaces, as well as lay down area for materials and support. So it's exterior support area for the zoo.
Okay, thank you.
You mentioned that the new zoo is going to take up 11,000 more square feet of parkland. Can you compare the both outside zoo area now and then, and also the building areas now and then?
Sure. So we can go back a couple more. So the existing museum building the footprint is approximately 8,500 square feet. The proposed museum building the footprint is approximately 13,600 square feet. So that's a difference, an expansion of about 5,100 square feet. The exterior zoo enclosure, so the area where all of the exhibits and people are able to access of the existing zoo is 10,600 square feet, and we're proposing to grow it to 13,000 square feet. That's a difference of about 2,400. The zoo support building, currently there is no zoo support building, so that's 0 for the existing. And then in the proposed, we're proposing a 2,900 square foot building. And then the exterior zoo support yard that we were just speaking of currently is about 2,400 square feet, and we're proposing an expanded area of 3,900 square feet, a difference of 1,500.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I agree that the museum and the zoo are fantastic. They're great. But I'm looking at this and I'm very concerned that Rinconada Park is getting chipped away. Walter Hayes took a big part of it, and now the zoo is proposing to take a large part. And earlier in your presentation, you said we want to be able to have a more welcoming aspect into the zoo from the park. But then in this later screenshot, you have a building there, which is not a welcoming thing to me. All it is a bathroom, a public bathroom facing into the park, and then this is a working building where the animals are going to be taken care of. So that kind of doesn't match up with what you had said earlier. Also, was a 2-story building considered? So you would take up less of a footprint, and you would roll out less of the zoo into the park, because that's really a sticking point with me. I just feel very strongly that this park needs to stay the size it is, because it is such a wonderful park. And is this also coordinating with the Rinconada master plan that we work so hard on? Because it looks like the play area and the tot lot have rolled closer to Hopkins, and does that mean that the barbecue area is now gone from there? it seems everything's getting pushed and then some stuff is just going away. I didn't see the barbecue area on here. That's all my questions and statements for now.
Peter, do you want to answer the question about the master plan? Then I'll address the questions about the building.
The playground does get pushed closer to Hopkins to make more room for the zoo building and the zoo itself. In that corner, though, of the park itself, there is nothing that really takes place there. It's not like it's a high-use zone of the park. It basically looks like the back of someone's yard because of the fence area there. So I think that the land that's being given up by the park is being better utilized in this sense. If you just walk around through that space, this area, again, it's not programmed at all. It's not used at all. It's basically mostly full of asphalt and is the back of the school. The walkway and the entry into the park with the connection to the parking lot itself is much improved with the design, even with the larger zoo and zoo building there. The proposed bathroom in the zoo building itself is something that was definitely a high priority for the long-range plan of getting a bathroom down closer to where the playgrounds were. So either way, I think the back of the zoo building or the back of a restroom facility, aesthetically they can be made to look a lot better than what basically is there now as far as the wood fence goes. Nothing as far as the amenities in the park is being lost. The playgrounds are shifted closer to Hopkins, but the actual playground itself expands because the top lot that's down by the tennis court is moved basically into this area. So you have a joint playground use, and the existing picnic area there is reconfigured, but it's actually gets larger and more amenities, such as a fire pit that was requested by the Girl Scouts is also incorporated in there. So actually, in the final design of the long-range plan, a lot more, I guess, elements are being incorporated into that area than are there now, which I think works very well in conjunction with the Junior Museum and Zoo there, and in close proximity to the school, that you basically have this kind of node of activity where people are gathering. So in overall sense, no park amenities are being lost in any type of way in that location. And the location being taken up by the zoo itself, like I said, is kind of a dead zone or dead space in the park itself that's not really being utilized for anything, mostly composed of asphalt right now. So, and it was definitely, the footprint shown was this footprint that was in the long-range plan that was discussed with the community.
And I'd love to address the issue of the building in the back house building in the zoo. We do have buildings in the zoo today, but they're scattered, small CMU buildings, and really don't reflect modern husbandry practices. And so what we are designing, we'll show you here, is a two-story building so that we can have public access on the roof deck, which is a butterfly garden. It's essentially a greenhouse on the second floor. And down on the first floor is back of house animal care, as well as underground exhibits for kids to go underground and underwater to see animals. And so it's really a stacked zoo with a back of house sort of connected to it. And this is the view from the park. The building is sunk, I think it's 4 feet into underground, so that the first roof layer is, I think it's about 7 to 9 feet. It pitches down. It's got a green roof on it, and then you can see the netting on top there above the greenhouse structure. And so I think that it should be pleasing, but yes, it's a structure.
I had 2 more questions regarding the parking lot. One of them was, you've closed off an entrance, and are you adding parking spaces? And then, because when you have a performance that comes out of the main stage, everybody leaves at the same time, and it can be chaotic. And the other one is, I noticed alongside the garden area of Lucy Stern, where there's 2 15-minute green striped parking spaces. It looks like you're redoing the brick there. I want to be sure that what you're doing is historic to the building, because it's important. I know right now it's just red brick and it's cobbly and people trip on it and fall, but I want some thought put into that design.
The red brick is historic. It's actually going to be restored along that walkway. If I can see the mouse. So up to this point here, the existing walkway will remain not exactly like it is today. It's going to be repaired within the next few months. That's using a lot of that existing brick, but that will basically be maintained the same in the language of Lucy Stern. That walkway, though, that then connects through the walk does exist through here. This portion is new, along with a new entry court there that does then connect you fully through the park over to Lucy Stern, making a better connection to kind of the amenities that are all there. We are aware that there is an elimination of a driveway into that parking lot, which currently exists in this location now. In the overall design, it was felt the safety and having a clear destination and drop-off for the Junior Museum and Zoo was a key aspect to that design because of the user group there, mostly small children, and making that clear designation of having ability to drop off and not having the main entry pathway coming directly in front of that was a big bonus to that design. The parking lot itself, I'm not aware of the number, 20 more parking spaces basically in the parking lot than there's there now. That is accomplished by the restriping of the parking lot and the expansion of the parking lot into this area here. And we are in doing the environmental review of that, looking at the intersection there and what can be done to ease traffic congestion in that area, as well as the ease of crossing the street at that location as well, as part of the upgrade for the parking lot itself. So,
Yes, thanks for your presentation. I went to the public meeting about this that you presented, so I had a lot more detail, which was helpful. The overall question is obviously going to be, the intrusion on the park that is existing. And so just to pick up on what Commissioner Markovich has said, it's almost doubling the intrusion there. And, that night when I saw it in the public and I see here in the document, I guess the question is, if you had to scale back, how would you prioritize what you would take out to fit it in? I mean, those of us, if we do remodels, we don't get to buy the land next door. We just have to fit it on the site. So when I go through here and I see things like storage or maintenance or exterior animal cages, interior stroller parking, not just exterior, but interior stroller parking, offices, I can't prioritize those. But if we're giving up square footage of parklands for people to have better offices and storage, maybe offsite storage could be helpful. And 2,000 of the 4,000 specimens could be offsite. Obviously, it has to be in the right kind of conditions and so on. So the general question is, how would you prioritize, to make it smaller? And maybe you can't answer that tonight, but at some point, I think that the various commissions should see an alternative that's smaller, so that they could judge, what you'd have to give up, because that's kind of the driver. And then another question in that regard is, since you're basically taking down the building and starting over because it's so magnificent what we're putting up, was there any consideration given to just finding a different location that, because it's already so jammed with the school and the parking lot and the community center and the park itself, maybe we should just look at a different location for it entirely. And then you touched on it, but at some point you'll have the opportunity to go into more detail, is you're now going to draw more visitors in. And you're already doing some outreach to Mountain View and East Palo Alto, and this is going to be spectacular. So plus or minus 20 car spaces, may not be enough. At some point, the city has to come up with the what do you say, the tough decision that parking spaces are going to have to go underground, as expensive as they are, because we're planning for the next 50 years. So maybe something as radical and as expensive as that has to be, tossed into the mix. So I think that's the fundamental issue, is the relative size, what you give up, and the increased folks that are coming through here that would, have to come in to see this, new magnificent spot, and where we're going to put them as well.
If I could just quickly mention what that footprint in the park does versus what the footprint in the non-park area where the museum sits now. It's primarily animal enclosures and animal back of house, or I say primarily because there's one office for the zoo director who sits in the zoo today, as well as the back of house that is really needed to operate a zoo according to the accreditation standards of the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. The animal collection is pretty much the animal collection that we have today, with a couple of additions, a butterfly house and a meerkat exhibit. But they're scaled to really meet those accreditation standards. And so the reality is the zoo today has exhibits that are too small. If we get criticisms, it's usually about, gosh, couldn't these animals have a little bit more room? And so I think we are pushed up against Walter Hayes on one side, parking lot on another, park on the other side, and there's only so much room. We did look at other sites before we ventured in on this, and what the conclusion that we came to is that the relationship with the community for this location and this institution was a great deal of a big part of the equity of this institution and the relationship of the community was how the ease of transport to get here. That the other site that we looked at was off a freeway, but it required everybody to get into a car and not ride a bike or take a Palo Alto shuttle or walk. And so as we solve the transportation issues, I hope that we're going to be able to do it in really a multimodal way, so that not everybody has to get here by car. But we will take all these into consideration and come back with some priorities.
Commissioner Italy.
I agree with all the comments that have come before. I also wanted to ask about the entry plaza. As I looked at that overview with the layout of the proposed building and zoo area, it looked like the entrance plaza is as big as the encroachment into the park. And I wonder if there's not some way to create a better balance there to reduce the impact on the park.
I'll probably turn this to Peter to talk a little bit about that entry plaza, but what I'll mention is from the museum standpoint and our ability to throw public events and have a space to really sort of engage the public in meaningful ways outside and have gathering areas. It's one of the things that are limited now. We would love some outdoor plaza space. But Peter, do you have any comments about that entry plaza?
The entry plaza, as far as the long-range plan goes, is a conceptual or proposed as a way to properly link the parking lot to the park itself. If you've visited the park, which I'm sure you have, basically you walk past the dumpsters, and that's the way to get into the park. It doesn't really have a formalized entry or connection to the parking lot itself. The end look or what that could be has not really been decided yet. It's more of a placeholder in the long-range plan that we would have some type of connection point that would lead from the parking lot. That could definitely be studied more, and we could look at the zoo encroaching more into that space. It is definitely made more difficult by the trees that are located there, a large oak tree and a large pecan tree, and the just encroachment into the basic root zone of those areas would have some impact on those trees. So I think the space that you're gaining is nominal, if any, as far as the entry plaza goes, and trying to add some of the space to the zoo itself. I think it definitely goes to note again that the restroom facility on the backside of the zoo itself, again, was a popular amenity to the community as far as its proximity to the playgrounds there. So I think that space would become if the zoo wasn't there, a restroom facility as well would take up the majority of that space in there. So I think it's definitely a fair trade-off. And as you can see, go back to one of the first images, the actual existing. I think it's all the way to the top. Yes. So then, as you can see, then down at the bottom image, basically, the zoo then expands out into this basically area right here. Mostly, like I said, it's the asphalt kind of meandering walkway that's basically next to the school, and a small portion of basically the larger turf area that's there. Not overly used in that respect as a main feature of the main turf area itself. So I think the usability, the benefit that the community gets from having the expanded zoo, the impact that it has, the beneficial impact that it has on the animals to have the proper care area for them, I think those are all good reasons to look at that space as being more dedicated to the zoo than it is to the park. So.
Commissioner Ashland.
Okay, I have a couple of questions. Can you go to the last diagram in your presentation? And the first question, when in the redesign of the parking lots, are these two parking lots that are shown here in this diagram, are they connected? Can you drive, once you're in the main one, can you drive to that second portion? Like, so they would become connected, okay? And then where does the main driveway go? You said the main driveway that's currently coming into the JMZ is removed. Is it now that the main driveway into Lucy Stern is, and then you would take the right into the zoo? Yes, okay. And then the public restroom access, I wasn't clear. Is that only once you're in the zoo and the museum and zoo you can access the public restroom, or is there an external access from the park side as well?
There's an external access from the park side. So anyone using the playground areas or the picnic areas would be able to come over and access the restroom right off the park pathways.
Okay, I applaud the addition of the Girl Scout fire pit. We've been sharing the Boy Scout fire pit for many years, so I appreciate the addition of that. And the main question about the redesign, is the existing foundation being reused, or is this a total tear down and a do-over?
We're proposing to remove the existing building. It's an older building type, and it would not be easily renovated or expanded to this newer building type. It would be costly.
So the foundation would be redone as well?
Correct.
Have you given any thought to rotating the placement? I agree with my commissioner's comments about the welcoming aspect of the museum and zoo into the park, and right now it feels like the welcoming direction is still the direction that it currently is. And if we're redoing the whole foundation anyway, has there been, did you do any proposals that looked at rotating it so that the entrance plaza was more adjacent to the parkland rather than the maintenance the zoo building there for equipment?
We have studied numerous layouts for the entire footprint. The goal was really to try and keep the museum portion out of parkland, as it's not currently a use in the park, and only put zoo program in the park. So that limited us to this area of the site here. We are currently developing the design right now to really strengthen the views and the connection from the park entrance plaza and from these areas of the park to the main entrance, so that there really is a strong view corridor. And one item that I failed to mention earlier is that this wall that encloses the zoo is going to be themed as an educational component, so that it actually lends itself as a kind of a guiding, wayfinding mechanism that leads people from the park around the zoo enclosure and then to the entry point of the museum and zoo.
Okay, and the final question I had is regarding the cost of this proposal and the fundraising efforts for that, as far as considering the underground parking as an option because it would buy back space, it would preserve parkland, and has that option been looked at?
The option really has not been studied. I think there was a proposal early on the table, conceptually that, gosh, would the city consider underground parking? And I think that question was bigger than we could answer. And so I think I would leave that to the commission and the city to sort of grapple with, are you ready for underground parking in Rinconada Park? It probably could be designed. It would be very expensive and disruptive to build. So is this the time, and is that where we want to go, I guess? It's a tough choice, I think.
Thank you.
Hi there. Thank you for the presentation. This kind of reminds me of building the megaplex, potentially, of soccer fields in the Baylands and creating a regional draw. I think our zoo is an amazing resource for our community, but I'm just wondering, is the goal here to make it more of a regional draw? Because you're using the word locally without really defining what you mean by local. You're not speaking in terms of Palo Alto residents. You're calling local like from here down to San Jose and up to San Francisco. I'm just a little bit confused. Like, what are the forces that want this regional draw? Because no matter what you're saying, this clearly has a huge impact on Rinconada Park. So it's really a question of priorities. Do you want to give up parkland to have a bigger zoo? My family has used this zoo a lot, ever since my kids were little, we continue to go there now. My kid now helps in the CIT program there now as a teenager, so she's been a user of this zoo from age 1 to now age 14, and she's not done yet. So, I'm a huge supporter of it, and I've always seen it as a program that's incredibly valuable. The staff is incredible. That's what makes it. The quality of the people who run this is just out of this world, which makes it as a huge resource for residents in terms of camps and training and leadership opportunities for teenagers. It looks like it's worked really well. And I know over time we do have to update things, but I'm really always dubious about regional draws. Especially because this is plopped down in the middle of a neighborhood. It's not like the Exploratorium in San Jose that is in the middle of the city. So I have a couple more questions, but can you go over sort of the forces that are leading to this regional program and why you want meerkats, for instance?
Thank you for asking that question, because I don't think I was very clear about the audience that we were building this for. We are trying to right-size the project for our existing audience. And to prepare for that, we did years of surveys of our visitors to find out where they come from, who they are, and who's using this space, and what are the limitations that keeps them from coming, because our goal is not to make this a regional facility. Our goal is to make this a great example of a local facility that does amazing work with its elementary schools and its community. And what we know about our audience today is about 25% of our visitors are from Palo Alto, and the rest of our visitors are primarily from about 15 miles in radius around us. And that what limits them is the age of our audience, which is a young enough age that they can only spend so much time in the car. There's a fair amount of stuff that comes with them, and then they need nap time and they need food and they go home. And so I'm also glad that you gave the example of your children following other opportunities within the Junior Museum. That is our core audience, is preschool and early elementary school age children, and that is going to stay our core audience. But what we plan to do is follow kids into middle school and high school as opportunities to help us mentor young kids. And so it's at a programmatic level, this facility allows us to stage their involvement in the institution. It's really not about trying to get people to drive from South San Jose or Central San Jose here. It really is about right-sizing it. One of the things that will allow us to sort of control that from a certain degree is that we are looking at admission charge in the new facility, and that admission charge with a membership program could help us make this much more available to local people versus one-time visitors, because people that go to destinations tend to do it 2 or 3 times a year, and so there's a price point and a strategy around, I guess, dealing with that. We're investigating all of that now. I can't answer fully how that's going to work, but we are looking at it, because I just want to let you know that we're as concerned about that as you are, because our goal from the very beginning is to right-size this for the existing audience.
And can you answer the rationale behind the Meerkat exhibit?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So we have an audience of very young children, and we have sleeping bobcats right now, which they spend maybe a minute in front of when they're active. Children need more active animals, diurnal animals that are busy in the daytime, and so we're trying to find some new exhibits that really engage them in animals in a way that's appropriate for that age. And so butterflies and meerkats are 2 of those species that do it. But we didn't want to throw out our existing animals, because they're all rescues and we're caring for them, and we wanted to provide places for them. But I think that's part of that prioritization that we talked about earlier, that we could come back if we had to make choices, what would have to go.
Okay, thank you. Now, as far as square feet go, can you tell me how much green open turf space is lost during this expansion? Because you're saying it's not really using area that's useful, which I sort of take exception with, because when you reorganize the tot lot, the young play area with the big play area, you're densifying the space that the children are in for their play, as far as I can tell. So when I look at this picture, it looks to me like there's less green open turf. Can you tell me what it's diminished by? Yeah, now compared to if this plan were enacted.
I don't have the numbers of what the turf is to what it would be with the museum. We would have to come back to you with that number.
Okay, I'd like that. Thank you. And also, can you just give me a really clean number? I've tried to add up all the numbers, but it seems hopeless. Can you give me a clean number on the footprint square footage now versus the total footprint square footage with your plan, just so we can tell the fold magnitude difference, just the entire footprint of everything now
Sure.
versus everything according to this plan?
Sure. So the existing footprint of the museum building and the zoo areas is 21,500 square feet. The proposed is 33,450 square feet, and the delta is 11,950 square feet.
What's the delta? Can you give a percent increase on the delta?
Ooh,
Percent expansion?
I can't do that math on the top of my head, but
50% bigger?
yeah, about 50% larger.
So it's not twofold bigger, it's a half-fold bigger?
Correct.
Okay. Okay. Have you thought about, hold on a minute. Since it's clearly a big resource for Walter Hayes School, have you thought about cutting a deal with them where they give up some of their land and produce a 2-story building? I mean, so they have all these 1-story buildings on their school. If they consolidated into a 2-story building, would they be willing to give up any land for the storage space? Just because they tend to use that facility probably more than any other school in the city. Well, first of all, do they use that facility more than any other school in the city?
Walter Hayes has the most robust contract with us, yes. We serve their students probably with more capacity than any other individual school because they are next door. And so we met with them very early on to make sure that what we were planning would meet their needs. And they said, we'd love to help you stay off our land. They also have a capital project that they're planning now to expand the school and get rid of the temporary structures out there. And so they're also feeling squeezed for space. So I think we have a very cordial relationship with them, but we can't really do a land grab.
You call it a land grab, but does our city ever, I don't know how that works. Is there anyone in the city, like the city manager, who controls those types of discussions? I think it should just be on the table.
It's something that the city and school district can certainly talk about. I would think maybe the city school liaison committee might want to discuss that. That would be the place to do it.
Okay. Okay, I'm almost done. Where do you want, how many years would this project go on, and where would the animals be, and where would the exhibits be for this whole, like, group of children that are born during this period?
I think you had mentioned, several of you probably have mentioned the value of the staff there, and it's the staff that make this work. And so our intention is to keep the staff intact during construction, which is about a 2-year period. And so we're looking at temporary facilities for both the animals, because there aren't places to place them. They're all rescues. They didn't have homes in the first place. And we would like, in an ideal location, we'll have a pop-up museum so we can prototype exhibits for the new museum, but we'll also need to keep the education programs intact. And so I've been meeting with the site councils to ensure them that our contracts with the schools will continue, that the teachers that they know and love will continue to come and bring animals and objects and scientific equipment to the schools and keep that all going. So we intend to move off-site during the construction and then come back in.
And would that include off-site for summer camps? Because you have a really large summer camp program there.
It would. The biggest impact would be zoo camp. The other summer camps, we offer 9 summer camps every summer. The others could take place in other locations easily. It's the zoo camp piece that would be the most difficult.
So you wouldn't try to do a truncated zoo camp? You might have to take it offline?
Depends on the site.
I'd put a big plug in to keep it going in some way.
That's awesome.
Okay, time. It seems like you just did the bobcat habitat renewal. I mean, when did that take place? I lose track of time. How many years ago was it?
It's about 4 years ago, and it's protected on the site and reused for bobcats and raccoons right next to it. And so we are going to salvage that and not have to spend that money twice.
Okay, great. What is the feedback from the public meeting? In general, we usually get that attached to a report, and we didn't get that tonight. I'm wondering when we're going to get the public feedback summary from your community outreach meeting.
I can get that to you. I'm sorry for not including it. We had about 12 members of the public come to our open house community meeting, and their questions were many of the same questions that you had, but were all in general in support of the project. And it was really more curiosity about how you're going to do this and what you're going to do, and really no concerns that they brought up.
Okay, great. If you can just send us that, that'd be great. And thank you very much.
Okay, we're about 20 minutes behind schedule, so I'll keep this short. In addition to that feedback at the public meeting, it would also be nice, this presentation, we were not delivered an electronic version of that, so you can also send us that. The PowerPoint that you're showing up on the screen, we did not receive that. We received a 4-page text staff report, but.
Oh, okay. Well,
is it on the site now?
it's
okay.
on the site.
Okay, it was not in our packet. Okay, thank you. One question. On the top of this is the 4-page text. On the top of page 2, it says, quote, "Due to inadequate storage and support spaces, accreditation options for both the museum and zoo are unobtainable." What does that mean?
There are 2 accrediting bodies for the museum and the zoo. One, the American Alliance for Museums, and the other one, the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. We don't meet zoo standards for both the size of some of our exhibits and the fact that we have kitchen and animal prep facilities alongside animal enclosures, which those need to be separated. Also, the animals that go out to schools have to be separated from the collection that stays there permanently. So part of the back of house building is to house those animals that go to schools separately from the rest of the zoo animals, because it's a requirement of accreditation. The American Alliance of Museums, the primary standard that we don't meet is how we house our artifacts and collections. We've been in this community so long. We have some very rare objects that are priceless, and they need to be under lock and key and in climate-controlled facilities, and this old building just doesn't provide us either with the room to organize that or the HVAC systems to do it properly.
Okay. Okay, I also would like to echo what other people have said here. I mean, the zoo is wonderful, but I really would like to see a smaller encroachment into the park, whether that's digging a basement, whether that's going a second story. If you could shrink the building, I think that would give us, you could pull the whole zoo back and you would have less encroachment. I do like the idea, like Peter said, about the bathroom really is servicing the park. I like that, but I would like to have that back another 20 feet. I think that'd be a much better design. And I don't know if everyone is short of space. Parks are short of space. We're short. They're square feet right now. Per capita is not hitting our target, and it's only going to get worse as population grows. So I hate to give up any park space that we haven't tried really hard to keep. And I don't think we've tried hard. This is a single-story building. I would like to go down or go up, and some squish it together so we don't go into the park nearly as much. That is it. Okay. Any other questions? Rob?
I'll just make a couple of comments here listening to the feedback. The feedback's very interesting and helpful, I think, for the staff and the team that are working on this. And I assume, as I looked at this too, I wondered about the parkland and how the zoo is larger and using more of parkland. And I suspect that's going to be the big conversation with the community about is that really worth it? And for me, as I have thought about it, what the value that the Junior Museum and Zoo brings is also just an important part of the equation. One, that the zoo is already on parkland, and if the zoo expands, it's not necessarily thought about as giving up parkland. It's using parkland differently, and does that make sense given what is being designed and built here for the community? And so, as I think about it that way, it has helped me to at least become more excited about the possibility of the expanded zoo. I just bring that up because I've thought about it quite a bit as well. The other thing that I would just mention is about Rinconada Park generally is probably the best park we have in Palo Alto, and I think partly because there's so much to do there. It's an excellent destination with the Arts Center and the Children's Library, the Children's Theater. We've got the park and, of course, pool and tennis courts, and then the Junior Museum as well, right there. It's an amazing destination, and that's why partly it works, I think, as opposed to maybe another location. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, we're moving on. The next item is the master plan. And we do have one public comment from the master plan. Shawnee Kleinhaus, you have 2 minutes. Oh, is she here?
Good evening. I'm Shani Kleinhaus with Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society and a resident of Palo Alto. Somebody asked me to tell you all that I'm an employee of Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society, and I represent the members of our organizations in this city and others. In Palo Alto, we have several hundred members. I think it's more than 400, and they care about nature and birds and having those species of birds and animals in habitats stay in the city. The Parks and Recreation Master Plan, I've attended several of the meetings. I know I've seen many of you there, and several times asked for the word nature to be part of the title. There's some kind of a process where the word nature is not there. I guess because it assumes that open space takes care of that, but I've seen the word open space being used for a lot of other uses that are not necessarily natural, and thought it would be good to specify it. If we specify trails, why not nature? Well, I think that comes into, it's interesting to me when I look now, and the Palo Alto, in Palo Alto, I think nature has an intrinsic value for people. They don't just want to have nature because they want access to nature. They actually want to have nature for nature itself. So that is not being measured, and it's hard to measure it. But this, all the criteria that we have here don't measure the value of the nature that we have in the city that is not measured by how many people are actually using it in some way. And just having it around, it's mentioned. Many people mentioned it in different meetings, but I think there's got to be a more specific address of the word nature and all the species and all the ecosystems and all the habitats that come with it. I have another specific comment to the...
10 seconds, please wrap it up.
I'm sorry, the recommended criteria, eliminating or including sea level rise and making that a criteria excludes from high priority a lot of areas in South Palo Alto, like Ramos Park, excludes all of a lot of the Baylands and some parts of Bixby. It's a problem when you come to areas such as Lucy Evans, which is one of the most valued places for education and for recreation. Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to the presentation. Rob DeGos and Peter Jensen. And consultants.
Good evening again, commissioners. So we have Lauren Schmidt here and Ellie Floor from MIG, and of course Peter Jensen, a landscape architect who's been working very hard on the Parks Master Plan. And just wanted to mention that last month's meeting was a challenging one on this topic. I had real trouble sleeping after that meeting, I have to say. But it was good, though, actually, and it was needed, I think, for us and for you, of course. And so we've done quite a bit of work this past month to sort of reset a little bit and in some ways just hit the pause button and take stock of where we are, the feedback that we're receiving and how we're collecting that data and how we're sharing that data. And then really sort of think through a structure and a framework for how that data will be used to define needs and then ultimately priorities and recommendations for the master plan. So I appreciate the feedback. It was important, and I think we've come a long way this month. And I'm looking forward to the conversation tonight and hearing your feedback about sort of where we are today. So with that, I'll pass it on to, I think, Lauren or Ellie? Lauren, okay.
Thanks for having us here tonight. And so you received in your packet a memo of a concept that we want to go over with you tonight as a way to help start sorting through what is a phone book of data, which I know is kind of overwhelming. And so one of the things that Peter has done is started to put together in one place so you have a resource for the remainder of this planning process, but also in the future, all of this analysis, all of the public input, pulling that together as a resource, and then we want to share with you a concept for an evaluation matrix and some of the criteria so that we can start talking with you about how we move towards recommendations in a plan. So before we get into the matrix, though, I just wanted to share some thoughts with you about how that's going to work, because I think your park system is so complex, the programming that you do, the facilities that you offer. I think the presentation we just heard is a real illustration of that and the balancing that you need to do. And so it's not like there's a bunch of this analysis and then all of a sudden we're going to presto come out with a plan. There's a lot of steps, and we need you and we need the staff involved in making decisions, evaluating things along the way. And so we just wanted to emphasize that we've had this data collection and analysis. Now we need to summarize that, say what does it all mean, and start thinking about what might we do in the future. And so to do that, first we need to understand supply, understand demand. We need to define Palo Alto's role in meeting demand across the whole system, not just, what are we doing for sports fields, what are we doing for museums. That will then allow us to define the needs. We can then think about what are the options for meeting those needs, because you may not opt to meet all needs. You may not be able to do everything within the constrained land base that you have, so you have to balance. And then and only then can we start laying out the directions. So so we've got a ways to go, and so I think it's important to pause and really think about those steps that are ahead of us. And just, thinking about where we're going, there's a lot of different tools, the directions that we eventually get to setting out as the right directions for this community. There's a lot of tools that will be in the plan. They're not just necessarily site-specific recommendations, but also policies, potentially standards, things like that. And we'll evaluate all of those things as we go forward. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the task at hand right now, which is around defining need. And supply, demand. I know one of the questions that has come up is, well, can't we just simply say, what's the percent capacity? And, are we low? Are we high? Will it be good into the future? Put the demand over the supply and see where we're at. And my answer to that is, yes, we can do that, but there's a number of assumptions, and I just want to lay those out on the table, some of the questions that we need to all be considering. We're not going to answer those tonight, but we do want to be thinking about those as we think about the complexity that is this park system. And to start out with supply, there's been lots of work in this process and previously looking at supply. We know where your counts of things are, where they're located. We know what programs you offer, but there are still other issues. So how much of the day should we be counting? There's peak use times. There's times that are very popular. If you go out to a certain site at, 5 in the morning, it may not be used. Do we count that time in supply, or should we be looking at those times that are customary use times? Defining capacity. Some sites and some programs, we know that you can put 20 people in this class, or the building has this capacity. Something like a playground, what is the capacity? We need to be clear, what that is, because to some people, 25 kids on that playground would be way too crowded. To others, you could just keep packing them in. The other thing that's really something that Palo Alto does well is temporal use. You do a lot of sharing, not just of your own facilities, but other facilities. So how do we account for the supply of a room like this one at Lucy Stern that sometimes is an exercise room and other times is an event space? And so kind of where does that count in the supply? So supply is even though we have a good idea of what's out there, there's some things we need to think about how we count that. On the demand side, we've had tons and tons of data, not just from the systems here and the registration system, but much of the public involvement data is really talking about demand. And one of the key questions is, who are you trying to serve? That issue came up earlier. Are we serving a regional audience? Are we serving a local audience? Something that you wrestled with in the field use policy, and I think that's a policy I've been impressed with when I've studied it. I've told Peter it's something we've recommended other agencies look at, because you were very deliberate about who you were serving, how you were going to evaluate those things. And one thing I wanted to also point out about who you're trying to serve, there's today's users, there's the people who you're reaching today, but because this is a long-range plan, we also want to think about who tomorrow's users might be, and what are the new activities that are going to be generated, and provide some space in thinking about needs to accommodate those new cool things that are going to happen in recreation in the coming years. The other thing on the demand side is setting parameters. That's something you did really well in the field use policy, where you had a kind of a standard about what's a reasonable amount of practice games, tournaments, that a local group could be allowed. Because if you don't do that, somebody could just come in and I want to do this every day, and as a public entity, is that as valid as something that's a bit more metered. And you do that with your pool right now about how you allocate lap swim time and other things. Really important question is the whole peak demand versus non-peak or average demand, because if you build your park system or you build a set of gyms for 7 p.m. on a weeknight, you're going to have a whole lot of gyms and not much of anything else. It's kind of like building your parking lot at the mall for December 24th. And so we just need to think about what level of demand do we want to do? Do we want to be looking at that season when a whole bunch of things overlap? You know, the prime Saturday, the nicest day of the year. And the other thing that's an issue in demand is certain types of facilities, certain types of spaces attract more demand and sometimes generate more. Like if you have a really nice dance room, all of a sudden you're going to start getting classes that work really well in a really nice dance room, and people are going to start gravitating to that. And so sometimes you can even create demand. We found through the outreach, for example, that certain configurations of tennis courts were attracting more use and more demand than others. And so we need to be deliberate about how we factor those things in. We need to have our team, the staff team, and all of you be on the same page around the assumptions so that you feel confident and the community feels confident that as we're stepping through and making decisions and what we're saying about the need, we're all on the same page so that, you know, we can do that math that you're looking for to determine the capacity and where you're at. So with that overview, I'm going to turn it over to Ellie to talk a little bit about this matrix concept, because we want to get your feedback on that to see if you think it's a tool that will work to help connect the dots and parse all of that data.
Ellie, I'm just going to say that passing around right now is a binder, basically. The binder is a sample of what you're going to be getting soon. It relates back to this information that Ellie's going to be talking about. It's basically the matrix that we have references back basically to the binder. So information, data, those types of things then can be referenced back to where they come from and easily found within the binder itself. So you will be getting the binder within the next couple of days. We'll figure out how to get that all to you, but I did want to send around the sample so you could see kind of the package of papers that we have now in there. You can see is very dense. That's what we're hoping the matrix that Ellie's going to start to describe here pretty soon starts to summarize a little bit and get you to a more direct path of where to find that basically information, that data that's in there. So.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. So we wanted to come back this month and start to answer or try to answer some of the questions that you all raised last month, which is basically, you know, not just what do you know, I think there was some concern and some fear that we were going to jump to recommendations and that path, that logical path and that analytical path wasn't clear on what those were based on. So we're taking this moment to pause and kind of reframe and start to lay out more explicitly what we know and how we know it. And the tool we're proposing to use for that is what we're calling the Data and Needs Summary Matrix, which was in your packet. So I'm going to take this opportunity to orient you to that tool. And then what we want to get a sense of tonight from you is whether this is a concept that makes sense, whether it does start to answer some of those questions, and if so, we'll move forward with populating that. The idea here, again, as Peter implied, is that this is kind of a roll-up of all of the data that's going to be in your binders. Those are all things you've seen before for the most part, but we know they've been kind of arriving bit by bit in piecemeal, so this is our attempt to kind of reframe and pull everything together and frame it for you. So what you got in your packet were two things. One is the matrix, so the big Excel sheet with the green header, and then the other was the data and needs summary concept, which is the narrative description of the matrix. So I'll just walk through, thank you, what the matrix consists of. So across down the column B, what we have in category are the elements of your park system. And so we've got three overarching categories: parks, trails, and open spaces, recreation facilities, and then programs. And you'll see this is not an exhaustive list, for example, of every park or every type of program, but they're rolled up into categories that we think make good sense and that we've worked over with staff as an organizing structure, again, to kind of present that higher layer of data. And then working across the elements in the columns, what we'll do is go through, these are kind of evaluation measures that we consider that we're going to base our summary of needs and recommendations on. So I'll walk you through each of those, and then in the narrative packet is a description of the data sources. So this again keys back to the list of data sources that'll be in your binder. And then for each we've developed, where appropriate, a rating scale and then criteria for rating that. So we'll walk through those now. The first set is column C and D, which are the current service and inventory, and then level of control. And this is basically a summary of what's on the ground. So what is on the ground, what is being programmed currently, and then how much control does the city have over that looking into the future. And that includes ownership, lease, and also, as mentioned, sea level rise. Moving into column E, this is our measure of capacity. And as Lauren just mentioned, there's a lot of different dynamics that can be considered here. But what our attempt at the criteria here is to do is to give an indication of whether it's below, at, or over capacity. And again, putting some parameters around those criteria. Column F is geographic analysis. And what we're presenting here is some summary statements because there are several data points leading into this. Some are qualitative, some are quantitative. So we wanted to pull out some key findings and summary statements here. Columns G and H are kind of two sides of the same coin. This perception of quality, as we've heard it expressed by the community and based on our own site observations, and then also expressed need. So quality is, are there improvements that are needed? Are there deficiencies that were noted? And then expressed need is really, was there demand for more or expanded services? Column I is quick summary of the demographic trends, the analysis of which I know we wanted to resurface for you. We mentioned briefly last time. What we've done here is kind of tried to roll it up and say, based on the demographic analysis that we did with the census and the school district data and our knowledge of recreation trends, do we expect that the demand is going to grow, be stable, or decline? Columns J and K are what we're calling barriers to access and projected demand. And so what this is, physical or institutional or other barriers that have been expressed. So why people can't physically or have trouble get to places, or why they can't access programs. Is it oversubscribed? Is it a time of day that's inconvenient? What are those things that we've heard articulated or observed in our analysis of the programs? And then projected demand is kind of a summary of, are there opportunities for new activities, for growth in a certain area? This is kind of a summation of not just the demographic trends, but the recreational trends, and then our professional judgment based on experience and planning in other communities. And then what that all rolls into, hopefully in a logical manner, is what we're calling the summary of need. So you'll see what we've done in this matrix that you received is kind of flesh out as examples 4 rows and a couple within each category area. And then the summary of need is kind of our high-level observations at this point based on everything that came before it. And then this is what we would discuss with you, discuss with staff. Did we get it right? Do you agree? And if so, then that becomes the foundation for talking about possible projects and possible recommendations. But we want to go through this exercise first to make sure we have all the information we need to get to there, and then it's clearly articulated. So I think the question is whether this helps clarify the process, the work done to date, the structure we're using to fill in some of the holes, to gather a little bit more data, and then does this kind of fill in that middle piece of the scope of work and the middle piece of the process that I think we felt was missing last time we met.
Okay. From the top one. Can you comment about the data sources on the top?
Oh, yes. So this is not the packet. Our intent was to get you these binders tonight, but there was a little production hiccup. But this will be the list of data sources is keyed in row 2. So for example, number 2 is the data and needs summary. Number 4 was the sustainability review. So all of the inputs into each of those columns reflects back. So it's essentially a table of contents for your binder as well as a data source list.
So is that going to be multiple rows, or how are you going to get that information in row 2? It'd be nice to have an example of what's going to be the content in row number 2.
So
It's just numerical, isn't it?
Yeah, that is the content, is that it references back the sources that we used to generate what's in each column.
So you might have 6 numbers in there, 1,
Yeah,
3,
exactly.
7,
So
9, 10.
for demographic trends, you see one number 7 because that references back to the demographic trends piece. For the column previous to that, expressed need, there's 5 items, many of which were the several different community input elements. So what's going to be in the matrix is those numbers, and they reference back to the summary products and the work products.
So they have an earlier version that doesn't.
Okay. Okay. Sorry.
Okay. I mean, the concern we would have if on row 2 you list 7 sources, then when I'm looking down on row 17, I have to go through those 7 sources in order to figure out where did that number come from. It'd be nice that for each number that you list, each content, you would say that comes from page 13 of reference 3, and reference it for each row as opposed to up top, because otherwise we're stuck just looking for the needle in the haystack.
So I think that it's going to be very difficult to do what you're asking, and the reason is there's not, a smoking gun around each of these things in each source. So there's not, let's say the question in, the summary from MAPITA, for example. There might be a whole bunch of comments in there that are in an appendix it's pages and pages and pages of comments. And so one of the benefits that we've had that is very difficult for you as commissioners, this is a huge amount of content. And so along the way, we've been taking it in, we've been assessing, and we've been overlaying and looking for patterns, and then checking as we come back. But for each and every one of these things, there's not, oh, here's the quotation or the figure that says, for some of them there probably is, but I don't think we'll be able to map, page 17, there's this, this figure, or page 19, there's this figure. And so I don't want to overpromise that, but I understand what you're saying. It's like, well, I have to look through the whole summary.
There has to be some rationale of how you score these things.
Yep.
And what I'd like to see is a separate document that lists the rationale for each one of these, because otherwise we have no way of verifying what that demand is.
And so that's one of the reasons why we try to establish some criteria. In some cases, those are more numerically based, like the perception of quality is one where certain MAPITA score ranges, because we can pull that data and say, okay, we can evaluate these things. There's also, noted issues around certain parks and some without others. So we are trying to use the criteria to provide what you're what you're asking for, so that it works across all of these sources of data and what all of those inputs are. So if you're feeling like these criteria aren't doing that, I guess my question to you would be, do you feel like we could dial those in further? Because I really don't think we can reference each and everything, because I think it would be, I can't tell you how many cells. If I'm just thinking about how many times somebody's commented on tennis or community gardens or whatever, there's just a lot.
Yeah, but when you are filling out this spreadsheet, you have to evaluate each of these cells. You're not putting random numbers in it. You actually are looking at, okay, I'm looking at community gardens. How did I determine the demand? And you must count something. There must be some way that you're quantifying the demand from community gardens, and there's some way that you're quantifying the supply of community gardens.
Yeah, yep.
So, since you're the one who's doing that, we're just asking you to show your work.
Yeah, and so that's what we're trying to do with this matrix. So for example, let me explain the thought process around community gardens since you chose that particular one. So we look at the supply, you have 3 sites. You have a high level of control over those sites, so you own that, you own the sites where they're located. It's not like a Cubberley situation where, if you just check the box and count it, say, we're good with what we've got, those are there, you can be confident they're gonna be there. We know from your capacity and bookings that you get more requests than you have plots. That's why that is rated over, and it relates to the criteria in there. You're getting more requests than you have supply, so it's over capacity. The geographic analysis showed, and you can see the commentary in there, your community gardens are clustered in the northern end of Palo Alto. So you have a number of plots that are arrayed across those 3 sites. All of those sites are in the north end of town. And there aren't other options for community garden sites. In some communities, there's churches or other providers that have them. The southern part of the community doesn't have them. So then when we step into the perception of quality, what we heard through all of the public workshops is people love the community gardens that you have. They think they work very well. We also heard that there is a need for more sites, more plots, and that jives with what we know, that you don't have any in the north end of town, and that the plots are oversubscribed. But the public is also saying that. In terms of the demographic trends, we know that older adults favor gardening, and your results show that. You've got a high population of older adults, and that's projected to increase. So therefore, the participation trend for that one, we project the demand is going to increase. So you're already oversubscribed. You're probably going to have more interest in that activity in the future. And so that takes us to the next column. There are barriers for participation, and the barriers are that there's not enough plots, and they're all in one end of town. And we see there being high, looking at all of that, we see there being high projected demand. Community gardening is one of those activities that's been increasing across the nation and regionally. That's why that's rated high. We have all of this local data, and so the summary that we would say around that preliminarily is there's a need for more plots, so overall more plots, whether they're at the existing sites or elsewhere. But
one of the problems I have is that right now we doing the high, medium, low, that's too coarse. It doesn't make it actionable for us. For example, if you say it's oversubscribed, so it gives an age, we have no idea, is it oversubscribed by 10% or by 300%? Does that mean that we have to find 3 more plots in the city or 300 more plots? We have no idea. And so when you keep it very qualitative, we can't action on that. We need to say the demand right now is 120% of the supply, and using projections, we think it's going to be 150% of the supply in 10 years.
I think we can get to that number, but I want to come back to what I talked about in the beginning. There's a lot of assumptions that I could do that math and I could give you a number, and you might feel comfortable that it's a number, but if we're not on the same page about the assumptions, then it's a garbage number. So if I make the assumption that all of the plots should be a certain size, they need to be a certain dimension. I work in a community where all plots had to be 20 by 20. They had a shortage of plots, but that size plots was too large for a lot of people to handle. So yeah, it was oversubscribed, but then yet when you looked at, did people actually follow through and garden, there were a number of underutilized sites. And so that's the trick of that number that you're looking for, and which is why we tried to stick with criteria. Is it generally over? Is it generally under? We can get to that number but we have to have a broader discussion then about what goes into that number, and also not fail to keep in mind that I think community gardening is one that's easier to predict, but just because something is undersubscribed now doesn't mean that there's not a demand for that activity, or that there wouldn't be in the future. It could be an emerging activity. It could be that you haven't reached the population. You know, there's populations we've heard that you would like to be serving, or that you think would be important to serve in this community. And right now, you're not serving some of those populations. So if we only are, you know, looking at the things that you're doing now, we're going to not account for the needs of these folks that many of you and many of the community members think is really important to, you know, to reach out to. And so we also want to make sure we leave space as we're looking at these needs to account for that. And so I don't want to seem like I'm ducking this, but this is a really complicated, and you as a city particularly have a very complicated system, and you have a very sophisticated layering of services that you're providing. So it's not like you're a greenfield community and you're expanding out and you're stamping out, you know, the same neighborhood park in every subdivision. It's very nuanced.
Just to add one point to what you're saying, you're talking about percentages, but I'm actually even more interested in sample size, because if, you know, 4,000 dog owners said that we need more dog space versus four, I'm making all these up, versus 4 community gardeners say we need more space, those are both very interesting points to know. But one, we need to take some pretty severe action on, and the other one, maybe we don't have to take any action on in the next 5 years, and we look at it in 15 years. So we're going to keep just asking for this quantitative data.
Yep.
Quantitative data. You know, not that you heard at a community outreach that 2 people wanted X, Y, or Z, but, you know, in surveys and in, you know, face-to-face votes, people said X, Y, or Z.
Yeah. Turned it off. I get that, and I think Ellie gets that too. One of the reasons why we like to do the type of outreach, and that you guys have embraced, is doing a lot of different types of outreach and different layers of outreach for that reason that that you're getting at, because you don't want just some organized group to come and sort of cook the result. And so in the expressed need, you know, again, we tried to get at your concern with criteria. So if across multiple channels, the expressed need, we ranked it high if across multiple channels, you know, 3, 4, 5 different activities, or, you know, through results that you'll see, you know, in the next month, survey results, through MAPITA, through some of the things that got really big numbers. If it came up again and again and again, then we're ranking that as high. If it's mixed, like tennis was one of those that's mixed, where a certain percentage of your population plays tennis. When you look at the overall community results, you know, people are like, I think we're good on tennis. If you ask the tennis players, they're the ones that have, you know, real specific needs around the facilities, about is it lighted, is it, you know, is it grouped together. When we hear from them, what they're saying is, you know, there are some needs here. And so in that case, it's mixed from these different sources. And so we ranked it as medium, because there's some evidence that there is a need there. But it's mixed. And low is, there are just certain things that just really didn't come up. Or when you look across multiple channels, it was just kind of so a couple of the things that it's like very clear there was a high expressed need for, and it's not reflected in this table at this point, but restrooms came up again and again across multiple channels as something that is really a critical part of enjoying the park system. Community gardens was one of those. having seating and great resting places in parks, kind of supporting people spending time, lingering, talking to their friends there. That came up again and again. It came up at the workshops. It came up in intercepts, things like that. And so we're trying to use those criteria so that as you start to layer that, you start to see those patterns that emerge, because the land here and the facilities that you have are just way too precious to not take all of that in and make the best decision, because you're going to have to make hard choices. And again, I think the presentation earlier tonight really made that very clear to me about the kind of choices that you guys are going to be wrestling with in the next 20 years. And we want to make sure you have a tool in this plan that helps you make the best decision for the community, because it will be difficult every single time.
Okay. We've used up 35 minutes. We've allocated 45, so we still have a little time left. We can run over if we need to. We have, the first priority is to do it right, but also I don't want to waste time. So Rob, what do you think? What's your priority of, do you want to hear comments from here, or do you have things you want to ask the consultants, or how do you want to work this?
No, I appreciate the work that the consultants have done and taken the time to work with us. We've met numerous times over this last month to think about this data question, and so I'm particularly interested in hearing from the rest of the commissioners. I don't want to sort of move forward with our process until we get to a sort of a comfort level or general comfort level. This is a framework that I think has a lot of value and could really help us with the master plan, particularly defining the needs. And then the next and more important step is then looking at those needs through a filter that is most important to the community, to start making priorities and recommendations. So I actually think it's a pretty good framework. But again, before we start populating this matrix and spending a lot of time, or having a consultant spend a lot of time on that, I want to be sure that the commission feels comfortable with this approach, this methodology for how we will use the data for coming up with some findings.
Comments, questions? Commissioner Knopper.
Thank you. I think I'm echoing what Ed had said with regard to quantifying the high, medium, low. I totally understand that why you need to consolidate all of the information. But if there's 9 passionate people about community gardens in Palo Alto, and there's 500 dog owners, at some point in the process, we just have to know that piece of information so we can then rank what should be priority, whatever. So not to beat a dead horse, but I think it's really important to be kind of clear on that particular point. I appreciate that we're sort of regrouping and sort of clarifying. I was trying to think of clarifying in a more strategic way all of this giant information dump, basically, and the way that we can cross-reference it. That binder is great. It's obviously overwhelming. And I'm really looking forward to having it in my house, but with all the other paper that we get. So anytime that you think, gosh, maybe we need to break it down and really cross-reference and give them statistics, and this is how many people answered this particular question, and this is a really high priority. Anytime you think, you know what, they want even more quantitative data, I would love for you to assume that we would, I guess is all I have to say. Thank you.
I just have a couple comments. I do think that this matrix would be a useful tool for discussion once it's populated, and being able to see what you see as the core documents for whichever column we're talking about. I do think it would be much more useful if, to the extent possible, you could make notations within the cells when there is a smoking gun or a key report that was most telling in certain areas. Otherwise, you have 7 of us duplicating all the work that you've just done and coming to our own separate conclusions. I don't think that's very productive. I also would like to know about, as I look through the binder, it's basically the reports that you have presented to us, it appears. And I know we had a lot of comments on most of them, so I wonder if these have been updated since they first came through us in draft form, or if we're going to reread what we saw before.
Most of them are as you've seen them before. We have captured those comments on all of the documents, and some of those comments on the documents were addressed in the form of memos to you, which will also be in the binder. For example, the ones that we heard last month, I have documented, but we have not gone back and re-edited those documents because we wanted to keep moving forward. So those comments have all been memorialized somewhere, but we are not necessarily taking the time to update those documents, but they are recorded and they will be fed forward. For an example, the program analysis, which we dug into pretty deeply last time, that document is still very much in draft, so that one will be updated. Most of the rest of them were in a semifinal state, as I like to call it, and so we're just keeping the record of your comments and then moving on.
And so just as a process point, the intent on these is they're a platform for moving forward. Your plan is not going to be a compendium of, you know, the demographic trends analysis and this and that. And so when we craft that document and the language that goes into that, any comments that you've made that are around, if we're taking a section of text out of something, all of that will appear in the final document. But I think to Ellie's point, none of that is lost by the time you've received some of the documents and some of the comments that you're making. They roll into then the next piece of analysis that we're doing. Because in some ways, by the time things get to you, the process, this is one of the challenges. You know, we've been continuing to move forward on certain other aspects of the project, so we can then give you the next round of analysis. So,
so the other piece, thank you. So we shouldn't look at the sustainability report and say, why doesn't this reflect that we had this discussion? I just wanted to get that on the table, that these are not final versions. They don't incorporate necessarily our comments.
Correct.
But I also wanted to ask a piece of data that seems to be missing from the binder, and I'm not sure how it can be represented, if it can, is your discussions with staff about field use. What's going on with field use? Who's using it when and how? Or the capacity bookings information. You come to conclusions about capacity booking, but there's nothing, it doesn't look like there's anything in the contents here that would provide the backup data for how you reached that conclusion.
Yeah, so capacity bookings is actually one that we don't have the data yet. That's some of the additional, we're working on that now. We've been crunching the program and booking data. So that's one that does not exist yet. It's still in processing form. So eventually that will become the program analysis part 2. That's really, about capacity and needs.
Yeah, so just to add to that, Commissioner Hedley, is that the binder will continue to grow, actually, as we get more data. Like the survey data is not in there yet. You make a good point about staff analysis and staff interviews that have been happening, capturing that data. It's actually pretty rich data. These are staff that are working in the field with these users every day. And so capturing that and including that in this and referencing it in the matrix is important. And then in addition to that, as we, and we've discussed this internally, as we discover certain trends that the data is starting to suggest that we need, more of something, then to do additional research or outreach to that particular group of users to understand more what they need. That would then also add to this matrix and to the folder of data. Does that help?
Yes, thanks.
And a forthcoming thing, I think, that will also document some of the staff discussions around the physical facilities, which I believe you'll be getting next month, it's item 9 on the data list, which are the existing conditions maps. And so those are detailed of every single site. It's giving some of the history, it's giving some of the noted issues and deficiencies. Darren has been heavily involved with that, other staff, in documenting the things that are there. So this is, again, one of these other pieces that the documentation is happening, and it's on its way to you, but you don't have it yet. So that's one of the other challenging things for you as a body is, things are not yet in your hands, but we're starting to formulate ideas about them.
I know that we have other commissioners that need to speak, but this may help as well. So if we think about the next step on this, once if we agree this is a good methodology and we move forward and we start populating this and start defining the high, low, medium, or whatever rating that we decide is the one that really works. An important next step that we would like to do is have a special retreat actually on the master plan, and then go and spend several hours on the matrix and with MIG and staff, and actually walk through these line items and talk about them. So here are the summary of needs. Well, how did you come up with that? It'll be in a narrative form in the summary of needs. But we'll have the binders, and we'll have all of the data, and we'll have a really rich discussion, I think, about each of these. And there'll be different interpretation, and we'll discuss that, and then we'll tweak the summary of needs during that meeting. And hopefully, at the end of that, we'll have a pretty good picture of the summary of needs.
Commissioner Cromie.
Okay, thank you. I think this is really helpful to see this, so it's moving the right direction. I would like to ditto that, what other commissioners have said, when you list your sources, if you can just letter them and then reference back to those sources for the key points, it's really going to be helpful. And something like when you say demographics show that we're increasing the number of school children, can you cite that report, those big kinds of statements, because that's a very global, issue. It's something as big as that. I think it's worth citing the document. A couple points here. When you were listing the elements on page 3 of the report, they go on to page 4. I think that's, I like seeing this kind of granularity. I appreciate this. I'd like to suggest that there's something more than, I like that you have experience in nature, but I also think we need something about the preservation of nature. And the reason that's important, it's because of the wildlife, it's because of the ecosystems. When we go to experience nature, it's predicated on having nature there to begin with. So if you can add that in, I'd really appreciate it. And like on this list, again, where you have all these bullet points that I'm referring to, one of them is experience of nature. Should dogs be fitting into one of these bullet points? I couldn't find it there. And
it's under recreation facilities, off-leash dog areas. So we were thinking about it more as on the facility side, and for some of these, it's how do you slice it? Like we put restrooms up on with parks, open space, and trails, just because it came up, kind of cutting across all use of the system.
Okay. Yeah, I just find that one can kind of go in a couple different places, but I know you're thinking about it. Also, it seemed like population density wasn't encapsulated, because that's really important for planning, is knowing where the population density is, and that's going to impact the kinds of gaps that we have. So again, I was thinking, that could be a bullet point, just sort of in the big picture. So I'd add that land preservation as to do with ecosystems, and then also population density. Another part of the big picture to me, when we're looking at supply and demand, is where our schools are located in the city. And so many cities are just very integrated with their schools, and the schools provide these major resources. Especially, I look at the community of Los Altos, or one of our neighboring communities. It's completely integrated because they really don't have nearly enough parks, and they really rely on their schools. And I'd like to see some meta-analysis of where our schools are relative to where the population is, because the schools provide a green space for populations. And I know in the south of Palo Alto, especially in my neighborhood, we're not near a school at all. And we have a lower amount of parks, and we're not near a school. So somehow the locations of schools can compound gaps. Is there a way you've done that in the past where you bring that in?
Yes, actually. One of the things that this original, that we're trying to retrofit with this approach is most of these planning efforts will have a needs assessment. They'll address things like that. But both of those points that you brought up around population density and looking at that kind of as an overlay, as well as where the schools are located, I think we need to give a little bit more thought at exactly how that works, but they either fit within that geographic analysis, or they become their own column around it. I think those are good ones. They are really important in actually the demand side. More people equals more demand, and on the supply side, because they provide an alternative, the schools do.
Okay, so I'm about halfway done. Getting into so those were sort of some big ideas. Getting into a little bit more lower level stuff. I'm not seeing the gyms really differentiated like I would like to see them. So what I know goes on in gyms is volleyball and badminton. And again, if you look at our demographics of having probably an increasing Asian component, that's a really popular sport among the Asian cultures, South Asian and Asian. And so I'd like to see that differentiated. I don't know how it came back in the polling, but if there's any, I just want to have a column for it if you need to talk about it.
Okay, if you look down in column B, in recreation facilities, we did actually call out gymnasiums. So it's the facilities we called out are off-leash dog areas, community gardens, basketball courts, tennis courts, rectangle sports.
Can you reference pages, please?
Oh, sure. It's on the matrix, and it's line 22. So row 22 is gymnasium. So it actually has its own row. So for the reasons that you said, it's come up a lot. We're looking at the need for gymnasiums.
But are you going to specify when you talk about resources and unmet needs, are you going to so many things are parsed out here. So I think the glaring errors to me, like you represent a lot of things, but I don't see volleyball, I don't see badminton, as far as it's being called out when everything else is. So I don't see a lot of omission. So my list is not long. It's just a few things. I mean, because you've listed so many things, you might as well list them all.
Well, so here's the thing. So the gymnasium is the recreation facility that contains those activities that you're talking about. And so if you were to build an indoor gym, you would program it in different ways. And sometimes you might have basketball where there's 10 people, 5 on a side playing each other. Sometimes you might put a couple volleyball.
Excuse me, I
courts.
understand that, but
Yeah.
if we're talking about gaps, aren't you within a gym going to specify any of these activities? I don't see where they're going to be cited.
So then we were looking at the programming, in the programming section. The grouping that we used within the programming, and this would be, you know, if this isn't right, we want to talk about it in a different way, but we use the groupings that the city already uses for how it thinks about programs. And so these categories, adult aquatics, adult special interest classes, are the way you look at data now. And in these groupings of types of classes. And so within those would be the specific activities that you're talking about. I mean, we'd certainly be open to looking at it in a different way. I'd like Rob's feedback.
Let me
for
specify
sure.
a little more. Like, I don't know right now if we have badminton as a program. So I'm saying, yeah, so that's an example of if we don't have it, yet people might want it. How does it show up on this matrix?
Yeah, so how I think it would show up, and we haven't had that yet here, but with respect to badminton for adults, for instance, it would show up in the needs summary. I would expect it would be in the narrative there, specific to programs, and it might not. And it's under adult sports, so within that particular need, there may be multiple sports that emerge as being needs, because under several sort of outreach efforts, it came up that badminton was a need or an interest. And so it would be defined there. And hopefully, if
Can you give me the line where it would be?
So that would be line 32 on the matrix, adult sports.
And could it come
Under programs.
Could it come up under youth as well?
It could,
Okay,
right? So there's
okay.
a youth sports or a youth and teen programs.
So these will get filled in over time, and then we'll assess
Right.
what we want. As far as on line 8, when you have essential activity access, it's sort of a bigger idea. You might want the word hit. So you have throw, catch, shoot, kick, and I think hit is for lacrosse. Anything with a stick, you know, that also relates to badminton, although you don't do that outside as much as lacrosse. That's just an idea. Okay, I really wanted to comment on now the columns E, H, and I on the spreadsheet, and I actually think this relates to a question that Chair Recto was bringing up with the community gardens. I think community gardens is a good example. You could, for community gardens, have, I don't know, you said maybe we are overbooked, so column E would come up as over. You could also have a situation where something is not overbooked, but you have H as an express need. Because an example with community gardens is very illustrative, because you can have all these people who live midtown south who aren't anywhere near a community garden, therefore they haven't even bothered to put their name on a list. And so I think those columns are very important. In fact, I'd even say you might want to push E over near H and I, because I think those are very independent kinds of things, and they're all equally important. So I like that you're doing it that way. And then when you're doing projections of need, like, you know, community garden, you brought that up with the elderly, it's a different kind of data-driven need. So our other commissioners are all very interested in you tying this into your data. And so you're going to have some kind of data of projected trends. It's going to help parse apart where the data is coming from, because right now you might rate something as a very high need based on projections of the aging population. I just hope there's a way you can cite that. It will make the argument stronger if you can do that. Because, you know, it comes up to this idea, okay, is it just 9 people out there asking for community gardens? Well, that's one component, and you can give a number and say within your outreach, how many people did you encounter? But then what would strengthen something like that is then your projection. So all those things have to fit together. When you can do it, it would be very helpful. Okay.
Yeah, we hit the 1 hour, so if you can
Okay,
keep it
maybe
crisp.
I think I just want to make sure I brought up everything. Well, I think I hit the major points. Can we email you if we think of other things? Okay.
Commissioner Ashland.
Okay, my high-level question, I have three little more specific things, but my high-level question is, the binder is containing a lot of the communication that we've received and commented on and discussed already as a commission. How do you want us to use that binder prior? I mean, other than when we're looking at the matrix, if we have questions or we think things are not reflected as they should be, we would refer back to it. But how, other than that, do you want us to use that?
What you described is one of the major uses. It's also a historical record. I know you weren't here last month, but there were some questions about, oh yeah, we received that demographic analysis a couple of months ago, but it would be great if we could look at it now that we're talking about needs. We wanted to just really have everything at your fingertips.
Okay, great, thank you. And then I'm glad, I thought that this was going to be our major topic of the March 20th retreat, so I'm glad that you said you think this will be a whole separate retreat that we would have to discuss the master plan.
Yeah, it could be the March 20th retreat, if depending on how far we get this evening, and if we can populate this matrix by then, we might choose to do that on March 20th. I mean, discussing this with Chair Reckdahl, which one should come first? He definitely would like to have a retreat where we talk about just the year generally and all the other, areas of work that we have. But given that the master plan is probably our most important project of the year, if we're ready to have a deeper discussion on that, I have an interest in moving forward on it and working on that on the 20th.
So you just mentioned that we, as a commission, would discuss and populate the matrix together. I was under the impression that MIG would.
MIG would, but
Okay.
we would discuss their findings and how they populated it and what conclusions they came to.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, and then the three things on page 4 of the narrative, that is the elements, the parks, trails, and open space elements. And you talked about that some points cut across categories, like restrooms, for example. And I would encourage you to add accessibility as a separate bullet point in that list. Walkability is number 1, which is great for the mobile, but not necessarily great for the blind and visually impaired or mobility impaired. So I would include that, particularly because walkability is not necessarily the point of access that many people can use. So sometimes parking is essential for people that won't be walking there, or public transportation as well. So that is the page 4 comment. Page 5, under the elements for recreation programs, I see that the bullet that says intervention/special needs, and I'm not clear on the use of the word intervention and that use. I'm very familiar with this area, so I'm wondering did you mean early intervention, therapeutic intervention, did you mean inclusion, or is there some other use of that?
That really refers to some of our sort of at-risk youth programs.
I'm sorry?
It refers to our at-risk youth programs.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. Okay, great, thank you. Okay, maybe that definitely helps clarify that for me. Okay, so when special needs is listed as part of that, or even as a separate bullet, I just want to make sure we're capturing both special needs programs as well as support for inclusion programs.
Yeah, within that particular sort of cost center and how the way the budget is structured within the city, there's 3 areas within intervention and special needs, and that is senior programs, therapeutic recreation programs, and at-risk youth programs within that.
So that's budget-wise as separate specialized programs for special needs.
Correct.
So how does one get further budget support for inclusion in the broad programming sense?
Well, I think to get budget support, we could potentially look at this master plan when it's populated, particularly if there is a need that's been identified across different platforms related to this line item around access or special needs in one of those categories. We could use that as a tool, and I think the council will be looking at it as well for where to invest more versus less.
Okay, great. And my last quick question on page 6 was actually related to the sea level rise question, because when I was reading this, I also had the same thought, are we automatically going to be excluding something like the baylands? I want to be careful, just because something is adjacent to the bay, that it doesn't automatically get excluded as a high priority for major investment if it's of value to the Palo Alto community and could have 20, 30 years of use.
Yeah, I think that absolutely. What we're trying to convey here, what the high, medium, and low refers to is the city's level of control over that site. So what level of control does the city have over the 50-year time span? Sea level rise being an impact we can expect to occur in that time frame. So it's not saying if sea level rise is going to impact that site, it becomes a low priority. It factors into the level of control the city has over the site. Does that make sense? So the high, medium, low here is not the priority assignment. It's high level of control, medium level of control, or low level of control, and one of those factors that factors into that rating is sea level rise. The others are ownership and management.
Right. Yeah, I understand the ownership. It's a lot more clear, of course. But so what time span are we looking at when we say, you know, a 50-year sea level rise might be much more significant than what's happening in 20 years? Or something?
So this is supposed to be a 20-year plan, and sea level rise is an issue that's come up, and one of the things it's made clear, you guys want to be able to make rich decisions, and so we decided to include sea level rise, not just in addition with ownership, because you should just be aware when later on you're going on and you're weighing like you said, investments at one site versus another. You may make a strategic decision that investing in a site with sea level rise is the right thing to do because of the need or because of the time frame of the improvement. But you should know going into it that that's an impact. The same thing if you were to invest in a site that you didn't have long-term control of the property, if you didn't own it or have a long-term lease.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's all my questions.
Councilman Filsef.
Hi, sorry, if I can ask a gearhead question here. On one of the early slides, you said that there was a line that said the master plan called for 3 acres of park space per 1,000 residents. And
no, that was just to be an example of a standard. The master plan is not calling for anything. We have to do the needs assessment and make that determination about what's the right level for Palo Alto.
Okay.
But there are, for setting Quimby Act fees, there's a minimum and a maximum threshold that the state says, and 3 acres is the minimum, 5 acres. So that's why I just pulled that number as an example of a numerical standard.
There's a state guideline?
For setting Quimby fees.
Quimby fees, okay. All right, thanks very much.
Commissioner Markovich.
I had a question regarding the collection of data. You're using census and you're also using school district numbers with regards to children, but we also have a fair amount of private schools in Palo Alto that the kids might not necessarily live in Palo Alto, but they're here during the day and they may be using park facilities. Has that been taken into account, and homeschooling kids as well?
I don't believe it's explicitly been taken into account, but we have identified youth outreach as a focus area we want to do more of, in part because we didn't capture a lot of middle high school students in our survey. So we're working with Rob and his staff to identify who the best contacts into that population are, and we're going to do like a focus group style event. So that's a great point that we should consider those populations.
To answer Rob's question, I do think this spreadsheet is a good start. I'm worried about the high, medium, low. I think that's just too coarse to make any actionable decisions, but we're on the road. But I want to see more quantitative analysis. Give me numbers. Okay, thank you. Okay, next item is the temporary batting cages at the Baylands. We have 2 speakers. Shawnee Kleinhaus is first. Shawnee, are you going to speak? Okay, then we'll move on to Craig Yanagasawa. Sorry.
Nagasawa, thank you. I'm a board member of Palo Alto Little League, and
Is the microphone on? Okay.
okay, and we're supporting the construction of the cages at Baylands, as currently Palo Alto Little League is the sole supplier of batting cages in Palo Alto, and we service over 1,000 kids with our facility, which includes only 4 cages. And our league consists of kids up to 12 years old. Beyond 12 years old and up to high school, there is no current facility for batting cages. Palo Alto Little League is not connected to Palo Alto Babe Ruth. We serve different ages. And then the 2 high schools which have batting cages are only dedicated to their sports teams. So we're just supporting Palo Alto Babe Ruth in construction of new cages. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Darren Anderson, Parks and Rec is
Good
is
evening.
up
I'm
now.
Darren Anderson. I'm with Open Space Parks and Golf, and with me tonight is Park Supervisor Miguel Chacon and Chris Lilios, who's a board member with Palo Alto Babe Ruth Little League. And we're here tonight to get the commission feedback about this project and how we can improve it. Go ahead and move to the second page. Let me start by giving you the background on this site and it being proposed as location for this pilot batting cage project. The city entered into a lease with Palo Alto Sanitation Company in 1958 for garbage collection, and we leased them this land on this site. That entire area, the blue and the green, was leased to Pasco, as they're called, and 1 acre of that land became parkland, and that's that little triangle in blue, and Miguel can highlight that for you with the mouse. You can kind of make that out. Eventually, the city moved on to a new provider. Instead of Pasco, went with Green Waste, and Green Waste didn't need that piece of land. And so it became unused. It was just a paved parking lot that Pasco had used for parking the vehicles and some storage. And eventually, the land had I think Public Works and had removed the asphalt, and it's just a base rock, little triangle, about 1 acre in size. And the city at that time explored, this is around 2009, 2010, and the city explored options to see if we could fit soccer fields or some sort of playing field on there. But because of the size and the configuration, that odd shape, we could not fit any fields on that. And it's a challenging site because you've got an existing PG&E power pole sort of right in the middle of the wide section that makes it really difficult. You've got about 5 or 6 utility gas infrastructure boxes that are at grade or some above grade. And then you've got a PG gas and power line easement that I'll get into a little bit more detail that it prohibits any structures on that facility. And now I want to show you what the site looks like right now. And you can see this is one of the angles looking towards that power pole in the center. It's, again, the base rock, and we can move to the next one. A little closer view on that power pole. Again, all developed. There's a few pieces of weeds, weed patches here or there, but not much vegetation, no trees. And again, you can see the fence line existing that separates Green Waste facility from the rest of this former Pasco site. And there's an example of one of those little utilities that's covered with an A-frame barricade that's above ground. Go ahead to the next one. I mentioned the PG&E easements. This slide here is not in your packet, but I'd like you to look up just for a second to the screen. You can see about a 95-foot buffer between these 2 easements. There's 3 easements, actually. There's 2 power pole easements and a gas line easement. And the 2 yellow lines on this sheet show you where those power lines run through the property, and the gas line runs right between them. And the red lines show that boundary where you cannot build a structure. Definitely makes it a challenge, definitely limits what's possible, but we took the plans that you see in the packet tonight to PG&E, met with them a number of times to see if we could adjust our plans, and we did, and they indeed approved of the plans that are in your packet. We can go to slide 8. So in May 2014, Babe Ruth Baseball League approached staff with this concept of building batting cages and funding them completely at the Baylands Athletic Center. And in light of the master plan, which is underway and again scheduled to be completed in November 2015, Babe Ruth proposed doing a pilot program for this batting cage project. And under the pilot program, there'd be 2 batting cages placed on this former Pasco site. They'd be situated outside the PG&E easements and would be designed and constructed to be temporary. They could be moved or eliminated and if the master plan or golf course reconfiguration planning determines a better use for that site. The other aspects to the project include converting 1 parking stall. We can go ahead to the next one, Miguel, so I can show them that stall. To the upper left, and you've got it in your packet too, but you can see a blue area that indicates a normal parking stall right now would need to be converted to a handicap stall, and then a small pathway that will connect to the existing one anyways. It's comprised of base rock. We just need to clean it up, and it would connect to an existing gate to that parcel, so no new infrastructure would need to be added. It's just kind of cleaning up that site. And at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Chris, and he can give us a little bit of detail on why there's a need for batting cages at this site.
Yes, I see 3 main driving forces toward this batting cage project. The one is utilization of the Baylands baseball field. A quarter to maybe a third of any baseball practice is spent doing batting, and I've seen countless number of teams spending time on this beautiful large diamond, hitting a ball, one person, a coach, hitting a ball to 12, 15 kids, one at a time. It's a very inefficient process, and it's a very poor use of a beautiful field, which is primarily used for games, base running, fielding practice, but the batting portion of any practice is far better executed in a batting cage where you can get far more repetitions in hitting the ball, the retrieval time is minimized, and it would offload the use of the main baseball field for a better use of it. In other words, having full-on scrimmages and so forth, and not using up a whole field just for one person hitting a ball to a number of players on the field. In addition, having the cages would extend the use of that area because the field is closed for 4 months out of the year. November, December, January, February, where no baseball activities can happen or softball fields at all. Having a batting cage facility would extend the utility of that area by allowing year-round training opportunities for not only Babe Ruth, but as Craig had mentioned, Little League, Palo Alto girls softball, the Oaks also play there, American Legion plays there, and countless numbers of moms and dads with their kids are out there just wanting to hit the ball would love to have batting cages. Currently, people go to paid facilities that they have to pay for to get this kind of batting in, and there's a big business around batting cages, and I'd like to have an opportunity for these 12-year-old kids and above to do batting, not using Palo Alto Little League's facilities, which are already oversubscribed with not only the kids in their program, but also older kids like high school age kids and middle age school age kids, which I think will be better served in a facility like here that we're proposing here at Baylands.
Thank you, Chris. I should also point out that in 2004, City Council approved a park improvement ordinance to add a batting cage at the Baylands Athletic Center. And it's unclear exactly why that didn't end up happening. It was part of a CIP where they carried out some improvements. That was slated to be one, and for some reason it wasn't included. But in that staff report associated with that park improvement ordinance, it was noted that most baseball and softball facilities of the same size and caliber of the Baylands Athletic Center do have batting cages. And it kind of demonstrates that this need has existed for a long time. It was once approved by council, and for some reason it didn't happen. We can move to slide 10. I want to highlight some of the advantages that I see regarding this project. One is it's fully funded by Babe Ruth. The second is that it could provide some useful information to the master plan. Batting cages is one of the things that was originally thrown out by staff as something to look at when they started the master plan process. And this could provide a lot of information of, is it really useful? Is it heavily used if we were to put in a pilot program? Is this the right site? Guidance on the preferred design in terms of durability and security, what it would need to make this successful. So there's some upsides in terms of the fit for Palo Alto, and especially in this area. Another advantage is once it's established and up and running, as Chris had pointed out, it would become part of the Baylands Athletic Center facility, and that would benefit other groups, Little League, softball, private teams, and camps that could rent it. Another part is because this is an undesirable spot to invest money in before we've got a finished master plan or before we've made decisions on what's going to happen to the golf course configuration, this is not a place we'd probably want to invest money just now. So when we have an opportunity to have an outside group fund it with the understanding that it's temporary and will pen the results of a master plan that's coming, it's definitely something that could be advantageous to the city. And lastly, this is a flexible project. It's designed to be temporary, so it can be moved. There's no foundation set into there. You don't have to dig into the ground at all. We can eliminate the cages when that master plan or golf course reconfiguration planning determines that there's a better use for that site. This is a highlight on the accessibility page where you can see that parking lot and that path that would lead into the parcel. These are some cage types. I mentioned in the staff report, they're still kind of deliberating on the two different types. We've got the open frame and the enclosed. And we just need some more time to analyze both the investment and the benefits of those two options. And again, the synthetic turf that would be underneath the facility. Now, if this project is successful, and by successful, I'm defining that as well-used, safe facility, vandalism is kept to a minimum, and access is equally distributed. If we have those things, the pilot would continue until the master plan is complete and we have a identified use from the master plan for this site. And if the master plan were to recommend this location for batting cages, and there's the demonstrated need, staff would return to the commission to discuss the option of a phase 2 for this project. And the phase 2 could include 2 additional batting cages, a warm-up area, a walkway, and a storage shed. And some of I believe it's in your packet, but there's a visual demonstration of what that phase 2 would look like. And again, that would pend further discussion, the completion of the master plan. Move to the final slide. And again, this final slide again illustrates what we're talking about, which is just the 2 batting cages and the accessible parking lot conversion. And that concludes the staff presentation, and we welcome your questions and comments.
Commissioner Knopper.
I think it's great. There's, in my opinion, absolutely no reason not to do it. And the city council, like I literally did a double click take when I saw October 2004. I'm like, wow, that's 11 years. That's a long time to wait for a batting cage. And I would put it up tomorrow if I could. So.
Commissioner Cromie.
Hi there, thank you for your presentation. I know batting cages are really important. It seems like it does increase the efficiency of practice, especially during the youth practice sessions. Are they used during the games actually, or just during the practices?
If there's like a game going on and there's another pair of teams coming on before they can get on for their games, they will use the batting cages to warm up and do some practice swing. So yes, it will be utilized to help prepare the teams that are coming on for a subsequent game.
And as we stand now, where all the other locations where baseball is done, are there batting cages, and are they at the schools as well?
The cages that I'm aware of are the ones that are at Little League. There's 4 cages there that are highly utilized, but they're on Palo Alto Little League private land, and so they've been kind enough to let the public kind of meander in and out. But other than that, there's a couple of cages at Carberly that I think Palo Alto girls softball has. They're small and not even well known, and I think they're under lock and key, so there's not much access there. And then of course, as the high schools, all the high schools will have 2 to 4 cages minimum, but again, those are under lock and key by the high schools. Other than that, in the city of Palo Alto, I have no knowledge of any other batting cages open to the public.
Okay, can you explain? Does Babe Ruth, it's a private club kind of baseball, it's a tryout system to get into Babe Ruth, right? It's a high level activity, so I'm a little bit confused if this is only for Babe Ruth players or if other people who are playing recreationally can use it.
Yeah, this project came about, was sort of being spearheaded by Babe Ruth because we have a strong desire to have a baseball facility, not just for ourselves, but our charter is to serve the baseball playing youth, whether they're Babe Ruth, whether they're playing Little League, whether they're not playing in any league. It could be a recreational softball player. They just want to go out there and take some hacks. I mean, Malibu Fun Center used to be the place where you can go and just take some hacks. There just aren't places like that where people can just take some swings. So although we're spearheading and we have obviously a vested interest because we have pretty high utilization of that Baylands field, there are plenty of other organizations. Like I said, there's the Oaks, there's summer camps throughout the summer that could use something like this. There's private organizations, and most of these are very Palo Alto centric, amazingly. I mean, there's more beyond Palo Alto, but I think this could serve a large fraction of Palo Alto need, as I see it.
Okay, that's good. And then it seems like an acre is an awful lot of space for batting cages. I know they're used on much smaller footprints, probably in all the locations where they're used. And so I know this is only temporary, but I really believe in having batting cages there, and I would support having batting cages, but where the rub for me is there is an acre of land there, and I just want to make sure that we envision the use of that acre openly and fully without presuming this phase 2 process. And I really am sympathetic to the need for the batting cages, and it has been put off for way too long. But we're going to be done with our master plan. Are we going to be done within about a year's time? So it's just the timing's a little bit odd right now. Like, you've waited already 11 years, and now we're about to come to this huge final product of the master plan. Do you think I hate to say it, but do you think we should wait one more year? Can you just give me a little bit more of an argument for why now?
My assessment is there are advantages to doing it now. That site, you're right, because there's a lot of things up in the air. What the best use of that is going to be, and you're absolutely right that the master plan is the document to give us those answers, and it won't come till November. But I also know that implementing that master plan will not be overnight. It's a very long-term process, and they're going to identify priorities that are really unknown at this point. I also know that, I'll give you a good example. Scott Park was one example where we had a CIP, and it took 2 years to implement a very simple CIP at Scott Park. My point there is only to say that when you only have a plan that covers the entire city, to wait on something like this for fear that maybe there'll be something come November 1st that should go right there is really unlikely. And if you couple that with the benefit of this being so mobile, so flexible, it can be pulled out really in about a day and a half, I'm imagining, since there's no foundation work. It's disassembling some pipes. That I think the downside is very, very small for the city. And I've had a really frank conversation with Babe Ruth to say there are going to be serious implications if we add 10 acres of recreation next to where the golf course is giving up that section, which would theoretically add who knows what. There's lots of different options, but there may be need for that 1 acre, and I don't know exactly how that will shake out. They understand that going into that, and they feel like it's a worthwhile investment, and I think, again, the things I highlighted, the benefits of what you can learn in that interim period will be valuable for us as we say, okay, if we don't have a batting cage accessible to anybody in Palo Alto except for these private groups where they're under lock and key, and we do need one, which may come out in the master plan, may not, then where are we going to put it, and what should it be like? Well, this is our opportunity to get a free learning lesson on what those answers are.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense to me. So to summarize, I support batting cages. I think it's it's needed for safety and efficiency for the sport. They're located in all other sites, and they need it here as well. I'm concerned about maybe we don't need I'm concerned about using the full acre for this whole complex program without vetting it a lot more thoroughly. So I think the footprint of the batting cages is pretty small. And then lastly, I always get a little bit concerned when I hear that things are under lock and key at the schools, and why we don't have better relationships with figuring out how to have more of a shared use. I don't know that much about how the baseball works. I know it's in soccer. Club soccer does sometimes get use of schools, In fact, schools seem to make money off of it sometimes. So I just wish we could understand that better on our commission. It's been a long-term concern of mine.
Commissioner Hedderly.
I think it's a great idea to have batting cages that can support the baseball field and softball field at Baylands Athletic Center. I'm a little uneasy about this, particularly because it almost feels like that acres, like the 7 acres at Foothills Park, that we've never talked about it before. We've never talked about any other use for it before, and as far as I can tell, there's been no public outreach on this pilot proposal. So and I understand that it's temporary. I generally like the idea of pilots. I think that's a great way to go. However, just as we've talked about with the dog park pilot, often once you start a pilot, it's hard to end it. So I'm glad that it's temporary. I do think it makes sense to, before promoting a PIO, have at least one public outreach meeting to talk about the location and whether this is an appropriate location, or it seems to be a different location than the 2004 PIO, so I don't know why there was a change in whose preference changed to make that location different. I'm also concerned about, excuse me, as Commissioner Cromie suggested, it's an acre of contiguous property, and if you throw a batting cage, though it's small, that kind of precludes any other use of that space for other functions. I have no idea if there are other functions that would be beneficial there, never having thought about it before I saw this agenda item. But if it were to move on to phase 2, I think, I'm starting to ramble here, I think the other problem with building the batting cages in order to determine whether there's demonstrated need, that seemed a little strange to me. It sounds like you're saying there is a demonstrated need. You have a need. Babe Ruth has a need. Little League seems to have a need. I'm not sure what more we're going to learn from a pilot about that need, except that maybe if you build it, they will come, and we'll have more and more people wanting to use it who maybe didn't before, or maybe aren't from Palo Alto-based groups. And that's something that can affect policy deliberations along the way. I had one more point. The phase 2, adding a whole nother acre to the baseball, softball complex at Baylands Athletic Center, seems to me an awful lot of space for a single dedicated use. We don't have any other use like that across the city where we have that much acreage dedicated to just one use. Even our synthetic turf fields that are used for soccer, they're used for soccer, football, lacrosse. There are multiple uses across the way. So that's not to say we shouldn't have it, but I think it's something that we should be thinking about, and I think that public discussion is a worthwhile pursuit.
Commissioner Lowing.
Yes, thanks. Most of my colleagues know I was on Babe Ruth board for 5 years before I came here. So the batting cages were on the docket then, and my recollection, it's probably in the minutes somewhere of the meetings, is that it became very cost prohibitive when Babe Ruth looked at it, because we got a lot of feedback from the city on the floodplains that we're still getting feedback from a lot of people on. It might not even have been only the city, because of the kind of commentary that's coming back on the golf course, which is why it just became too cost prohibitive to do. And I don't know if you had to have them 6 feet high or whatever it was, but that was that was the reason for that. There's no question there's a demonstrated need, and to your point, I don't think we even need a pilot, but because there just aren't any. And a lot of times Babe Ruth teams would go over to the Little League fields, or if they could get space on the weekends at the high school, particularly Pally, they would go over there before games to warm up in the batting cages. So it's completely inconvenient. So it's too bad that this isn't getting in time for this season, but maybe you'll make the tournaments. So just a couple of questions. One is, as this thing was getting back up, was there any debate about should we go back to the first baseline, or is it just because this land was available here? And then the second question is, as you look at phase 2, if that were to happen, notwithstanding comments of my colleague here, the easement seemed to be right smack in the middle of that, so I didn't know how you were going to be able to do that anyway.
The first question you asked of why not the first place that was identified in 2004, it pertains to the JPA project where that levee adjacent to the batting cage in that diagram will be pushed up very, very close to that area, pinching it off, so much so that the walkway is almost compromised. It's very, very tight there in the plans, and it seemed to make sense to look at another option. And so that's
my
why.
guess.
And your second question was, can you repeat that one more time, the phase 2?
If you were to look at phase 2, how can you? Because it looks like it's right in the middle of the easements.
Oh, yes. Well, we met with PG&E, showed them phase 1 and phase 2 to say, would you have a problem with this? And I guess it's predominantly because it's not anchored in the ground, it can be moved, and would not interfere with their direct access to those things. They gave us the okay, and I have it in writing.
To your question, Commissioner Cromie, the answer why you can't use the high schools is because the high school coaches are czars, and they're totally in charge, and there's one key, and that person has it. So it's just you can call it cultural, but they do use it an awful lot. Thanks. Very good presentation and preparation.
I have one more quick question.
Okay. Commissioner Heatherly.
Do you anticipate when you're using the batting cage that it will be the same folks who are using the field at the same time, it sounds like, as part of your practice, or would you expect that you would have an increase in usership because you may have teams practicing on the field and other folks using the batting cages simultaneously? And would you anticipate that being an issue for parking?
Yes, I think when word gets out that there's a batting cage, there will be independent groups going just for batting practice. In fact, teams that I've been involved with, we have 2 or 3 practices a week, and one of them is dedicated to just batting alone. And so we will either go to the cage facility up in Belmont, or there's other facilities you can rent out for a pretty penny. I could see this be a perfect place for those kind of activities happening. So yes, there will be an additional, probably, well, generally people drop off their kids and take off. They don't sit around to watch batting practice. It's not very much of a spectator sport for the parents, but there will be a little bit, but I don't expect it to be substantial.
Thank you.
It just occurred to me, as far as environmental impact, is it going to disturb birds in the area if there's just a constant use of the popping of the bat against the ball? Have you talked to any groups about that, environmental groups, about impact?
We have not. I think the use would be in keeping with the baseball that's happening there. It would be programmed by the same gentleman, Adam Howard from Recreation, who programs the field use. So we have control over it. So it's not as if it would be 24/7. So it's not the open thing where you can check in at midnight and start swatting. It's unlit. So we don't have to worry about light impacts. So our belief is it's going to be in keeping with the use there and not a dramatic change. It's also in an area where there's no vegetation. We can certainly do, more exploring to see if there are any concerns about that, but it's not one staff has right now.
Okay, because normally we vet with different stakeholders when we set up a new recreational facility, and so I was looking at it simplistically that it's the same kids that are there that then just use the batting practice, but when you start to talk about a regional draw, I actually do get quite concerned about the density of use. So I'd just like I don't know what to do about that. I don't know if we're making it known that we're concerned about that. So can you give us some kind of follow-up and let us know how that's going?
Yes, I think in advance of that, at the next time we bring this back to you, again, it'll be in keeping with how we manage the existing fields. So that baseball field at the athletic center is not just come help yourself, come play as many league games as you want, come in from all the surrounding communities. It's all brokered and managed by our recreation team. So we don't suffer that problem with the fields, and I don't anticipate suffering that same problem with the batting cages because we manage the same way.
Okay, I'm very familiar with our field use for soccer, But I'm really not that familiar with looking at that policy for that facility. So maybe one day you can educate us on that.
I'd be glad to bring a draft policy for the batting cages that's proposed. We've already got a draft going. It needs to be vetted a little more fully. We'll be glad to bring that back when we bring this issue to you again.
Well, like Ed, my son plays Babe Ruth, and so we've spent many hours in the batting cage, never down the Baylands, but before games we'll go over to the Little League field and throw batting practice there and then drive over to the Baylands. So it'd be nice to have it in one location, just be able to do batting practice before the games, right at the place where the game, the place where the game is. On the far left of that picture of the blue triangle, there right now is a fence. And if we open that fence up, we would connect over to the skin field that has Little League and also has girls softball. So I would like to see that considered to say, can we put a gate in there and have the same lock on the gate as we have on the other gate, so that if 50-70 who plays their Little League game down there or the girls softball want to use that, they can access that directly instead of having to go all the way around. Certainly it's not that far to walk around, but it would be a much shorter shot to go through that little gate right at the far left. So I would like to see that considered. The other is, after the golf course is reconfigured, knock on wood, there's a lot of decisions to be made. And one question is the green waste lease. Do you know the duration of that? And is that area going to be open for reconfiguration also, or we have to move around that?
Yeah, I don't have the answer to that, but I'd be glad to research it.
Okay. I mean, that I find irrelevant right now. This lot is going to be sitting empty for the next 2-3 years because we're not going to put anything permanent on there while the golf course is being reconfigured. So either we can have a temporary batting cage on there for the next 2-3 years, or we can have it sit empty for the next 2 or 3 years. I view this as a no-risk proposition. So that is it. Any other questions? Okay, path forward. Do you know the path forward now, or do you still have to do some work figuring out what you want to do?
Well, an option for moving forward, I'd like to think about it and perhaps consult with my director, but an option is hold a public meeting, come back with a PIO based on feedback we've gotten with the design and see if the commission approves, and then go to council afterward.
Okay, so typically if you were to schedule a public meeting, how much lead time do you want to have for that? Is that a couple weeks?
Yeah, 2.5.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, we move on to number 5, the Measure E site. And we do have one public speaker, Emily Renzel, is going to be talking about the Measure E site.
At the risk of keeping poor Matt Krupp here for another 3 minutes, the Measure E issue has been studied quite a lot, and I think with the last request for proposal that went out, staff had pretty much decided that much of the 10-acre site would not be excavated and used for composting, just the 3.8 acres of the 10 acres. So there are basically sort of 2 portions of the 10-acre site with greater and lesser likelihood of being used in the next 6 years or so, 7 years before 2021, whatever that 6 years. And I just want to be sure that planning for the Bixby Hills Park not work around that 10 acres in unlogical ways. In other words, at least with not necessarily putting anything on it, but looking at your trail systems and everything else to make them logical in the event that we can rededicate this land. The Measure E prevents the council from rededicating the land, but the council could, at some point, once it's determined that the site would not be used, could put it to the voters sooner. So that's always a possibility. I'm not advocating that at this point. I'm just suggesting that in your planning, you should look at the whole site, at least the part that doesn't include the flatter 3.8 acres, and do your best to have a forward idea of what will happen there. And I just can't resist commenting that I think use of the 1 acre triangle for batting cages is great. It's reclaiming this parkland that's been parkland since 1965. It was allowed to be used by the garbage company, and they were supposed to restore it to baseball field when it was done, and that Waste Management sold it. Well, Pasco sold to Waste Management, and then we went to Green Waste, and so it never happened. But the triangle has been parkland since 1965. The Green Waste acre was exempted from the park dedication, so whoever asked the question about use of it, it wouldn't necessarily not be available for park should at some point it be decided, but it is not currently park dedicated. So,
okay, thank you. Okay, so Matthew Krupp, you'll be talking about the Measure E area. Thank you.
Hi, good evening, Commissioners. Matthew Krupp with Public Works, Zero Waste. I'm an Environmental Programs Manager for the Zero Waste Group, and if you have any questions about recycling or composting later, I'll be happy to answer those as well. But the reason I'm here today is to talk to you about the Measure E parcel and the RFPs, the proposals that process that came out of that, and I was the project manager on both the energy compost facility request for proposal and the subsequent compost facility request for proposal. I don't know if I can go off script, but I actually can answer a question that came from the last presentation from Commissioner Reckdahl about that parcel that Green Waste uses right now. The Green Waste of Palo Alto contract currently goes until 2017, and staff is going to present to the Finance Committee just next week a proposal to extend the contract to 2021. Part of that contract extension is also looking at an opportunity for Green Waste to locate its sort of short-term corporation yard, which is what they use that facility as, in a location outside of Palo Alto. So we currently require them to have a facility within Palo Alto, but a new contract amendment would allow them to have a facility outside of Palo Alto. But of course, we have to look at the needs of servicing our refuse customers, the garbage, and getting all the different carts out there. But again, that's something that we're looking at the opportunity to change should the use be desired to be changed by you guys and the council. So I wanted to address that question while I was here. So Darren didn't have to come back and ask me later.
The purpose of having that site, is that for drop-off?
That site is the office for the local staff. So we have the managers and the route supervisors who are located over there. Also, our outreach staff is located there as well. We also have carts and bins for our residential and commercial customers that are located there, so we can provide very fast service. So like, let's say if one of you called up and said, hey, my garbage cart is broken or something like that, we can get it out to you, and a lot of times the same day, if not the next day, which is a service that many other garbage companies can't provide. So we are able to provide very speedy service. The larger Green Waste Corporation yard, where all the trucks are located, is actually in Santa Clara off of Lafayette Street. So we can't get there quite as quickly.
If we do not require them to have that local, would they want that 1 acre still?
Well, that's something that we would have to work out with Green Waste. So about 2 years ago, there was a question about whether that site was going to be needed for other park uses. And Green Waste investigated other sites around the community and found that there were basically none that could service them within the boundary of Palo Alto. So that's why we looked at providing Green Waste the opportunity to have a site that was located outside of the boundaries of Palo Alto.
Okay. Just from the last presentation, that little triangle is very hard to use with that 1 acre blocking it. It'd be, when we look at the reconfiguration, it'd give us a lot more flexibility if we could convert that into parkland, even if that means moving that to somewhere else.
Sure, sure, and I think that's a good question. And I haven't been involved in the master plan that was talked about earlier today, but I would imagine that that parcel would be considered as part of a master plan parcel. So, but I don't want to speak on something that I don't know enough about. But as Emily Renzel said, it was parkland that's being used for another use right now.
Okay. Thank you.
So sorry to go off script there. Anyway, let's get back onto the story of the former Palo Alto landfill and garbage and wastewater. So you'll all be experts by the end of this presentation, I hope. We did have a lot of people helping with this whole project, and they're listed over there: consultants ARI, CH2M Hill, and Jim Binder Consulting. And this project was, at least the first part of it, the energy compost facility, was a joint project that was with the Zero Waste Group in Public Works and also the Regional Water Quality Control Plant, another division within Public Works. So before I go into the specifics of Measure E in that parcel, I want to talk to you about some of the goals that staff had in order to define the best possible project. What we're looking at is we needed to do a number of things from the wastewater perspective and from the solid waste perspective. The most important thing actually is on the wastewater side was decommissioning our sewage sludge incinerator, which is one of the largest sources of greenhouse gas emissions within the city. There are only 2 sewage sludge incinerators that operate within the Bay Area. We're one of them, and it was a council priority to decommission and turn off that incinerator. So that's one of the priorities that we were looking to do from the wastewater side. On the solid waste side, we're looking at 2 things. The first thing was to find a new home for a composting operation. You might remember not that long ago, we composted yard trimmings, your yard trimmings, over on the landfill, on top of the landfill. Once the landfill was closed and needed to be closed, that operation needed to stop. We had to end that operation. It was not compatible with the use of Bixby Park to have a composting operation on top of it. So that operation closed back a few years ago. So we wanted to look at a new place to put composting and compost the yard trimmings. But we also wanted to identify if there was an opportunity to take our commercial food scraps, so food that's not eaten at restaurants, and also residential food scraps, and harness the energy in that material. So we're trying to find all of that stuff. And by doing all that, we would reduce greenhouse gas emissions and be able to handle all of these 3 wastes. Now, one of the ideas that came out in the proposal in the Measure E ballot initiative is that perhaps there's a technology that can do all of these things together, can handle the biosolids, the sewage sludge, the yard trimmings, and the food scraps together in one combined technology. So that was a premise that was based early on. So we were looking at all of these things to try to see if we can do them. Were we successful? Well, the short answer is no, we weren't, but I'll get to the rest of it in a second. Now, how did we get to the point where we're at right now? We did a feasibility study back in 2011 to see if it even made sense to pursue this further. And we looked at a number of different technologies, including dry anaerobic digestion. That was the original technology that was proposed by the Palo Altans for Green Energy, the people who put together the Measure E initiative. So we looked at that, and it proved that it could be feasible. But, feasibility study is only the first step. So what happened from there is that council elected to put the Measure E item on the ballot. It was on the ballot in November of 2011, passed with a 2/3 majority. A couple things that are interesting about the Measure E ballot initiative. One is that it called for staff to investigate the opportunity for putting an energy compost facility on this 10-acre Measure E site, which I'll talk about in a second. It also undedicated the 10 acres of Bixby Park Hills until 2021. And what Emily Renzel was saying is that after 2021, council could elect to return that back into parkland. But until such time, it was available for use. It didn't mandate that the use had to be there, but it called for the investigation and the opportunity to put that energy compost facility there. So I want to just make that distinction quickly for you. So In 2013, we released an RFP for an energy compost facility that called for a technology to handle all of these feedstocks, the three that we talked about before, biosolids, food scraps, and yard trimmings, either in one facility or perhaps in multiple facilities with the opportunity to use an acre within the wastewater treatment plant and the 10 acres of the Measure East site. We did that. What we found is that nothing really worked the way we had hoped. We didn't get a proposal that would satisfy the needs of both our solid waste needs and our wastewater needs. What it did clarify, though, was that there was a certain technology that was appropriate for the wastewater side of the shop, and I'll get to that in a second. So that RFP was canceled. The council elected to reject all the proposals at that point. But they said at that point, well, we don't want to use the entire Measure East site. 10 acres is not appropriate to build on. So we're going to restrict you to 3.8 acres, and I'll show you that in a second. 3.8 acres of that site, which is fairly flat, and we want you to look at right away to see if it's possible to put a composting facility to compost yard trimmings and possibly residential food scraps together on this 3.8 acre site. So right away, we quickly turned around in, I would say, record speed for government, a new RFP, which was looking at just composting on that Measure East site. So what did we find? Well, the Measure East site is complicated, and building something there was very expensive, much more expensive than composting outside. So at that point in time, when we get to December of just last year, a few months ago, council said, you know what? Maybe this isn't quite ready for prime time. We're going to hold off on this project, and we're going to continue essentially with the status quo. So that's the lead. And I want to give you a little bit more background about the site here. So now you know the ending, that nothing's happening over there for at least a little while. So I want to talk about the site itself so you have some perspective. I know all of you spend a lot of time out on Bixby Park, so Darren gives me full reports back when he sees you all out there. But here's the park over here, and of course we're going to be opening up a large portion of the last phase over in Earth Day, so that'll be very exciting, and we're going to be presenting next month to you about the Bixby Park Hills concepts and the trails and all the great stuff we're doing over there. But right now, if we look at the Measure East site, you can see this site is in blue. That's about 10 acres. And the dark blue over here, this is what we call the relatively flat area, the 3.8 acre area. That was part of the compost facility RFP. And then the treatment plant is over here in yellow. So one of the reasons that we weren't able to do anything right away on the Measure East site, and especially that 3.8 acre site, is that it has a number of constraints on the site. There's a habitat corridor, a set of trees, pretty well established, that was serving as a barrier between the landfill and the wastewater treatment plant right over here. And that connects the bay over here with Renzel Marsh. And there's a lot of really great habitat in there, foxes and some other bunch of critters that are too numerous to name. So building on that site would involve the potential dislocation of that particular habitat corridor. So that's one challenge. The second challenge is building anywhere on the Baylands is no easy feat. Underneath all that land is bay mud, not really the most conducive neighborhood to build stuff in. In addition to that, right over here is a landfill. So you're building next to a landfill, which is also not the easiest thing to build on. Add on to that a number of pipes that go underneath the site, real challenge. All of that drove up the costs and just made building even a simple compost facility very expensive. The last piece of making it expensive, you're like, why is it so expensive to build a compost facility? They seem like they should be pretty cheap. Well, you guys all have noses, right? Okay, so compost is kind of smelly, you know, it can be anyway. And what we required, because the use of Bixby Park Hills is a park, and people would be right here, you know, like, you know, walking there, you know, taking nice strolls and going by, you know, they would smell what was coming off this facility. So we required the highest level of odor protection possible for that facility so that it would not smell off-site at all. So you wouldn't have to go by and smell. Some people like the smell of compost. Me, personally, not so much. But to have full odor control on that site, which, again, drove the costs up. So in turn, that is why we don't have a facility located on that site. So what are we actually going to do, and I'll try to wrap this up quickly for you, is as part of the recommendation back in May of 2014, we broke up our plans for dealing with organics, those 3 different organic streams, yard trimmings, food scraps, and biosolids, into 3 or 4 components. The first component, number 1, is addressing biosolids specifically, and that allows us to decommission the incinerator so we can take those biosolids and send them off to either the Central Valley or over to the East Bay Municipal Utility District in Oakland to be processed there. So it's a new truck offloading facility as part of component 1. That project is underway right now. Affiliated with that project and also underway, the first 2 components, by the way, are inside the treatment plant. Keep that in mind. So component 2 is anaerobic digestion. That's wet anaerobic digestion, building giant tanks that essentially eat the biosolids, the sewage sludge, and that would also be located within the treatment plant. Part of that facility would be locating food scrap, sending food scraps to those digesters, and that would all generate energy. And all that energy would more than satisfy the energy needs of the wastewater treatment plant, which is one of the largest energy users in the entire city. So it's a very green and sustainable effort. It's essentially energy that you guys create through your trips to the bathroom, I apologize for being blunt, and the food that you eat, so, or don't eat in this case. So that's components 1, 2, and 3, and all that would be located within the treatment plant's footprint. That component 4, that was what we were looking at with the compost facility RFP, and that's the piece that we are currently, for lack of a better word, on hold and sending our organics outside of the community. So I thought I had another slide at the end of there, but that's okay. Let's see where we're at here. My apologies. Here we are. View slide. Bear with me for 1 second here. We're experiencing technical difficulties. There we are. Okay. So what happens, again, we talked about in December 2014, the decision to go with the lower cost option to use composting facilities for our yard trimmings and food scraps outside of Palo Alto. We're currently looking at a facility that's not very far, about 15 miles from our current location in North San Jose to do that. We're going to provide annual updates every December on the status of the composting technology to see if there are options, lower cost options to use on the Measure E site. And again, this site can be considered for energy/compost uses until 2021. And at that time, in 2021 and beyond, the council can elect to return it back to parkland. So that is the close of my presentation. Thank you for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Before we start the questions, can you give one clarification? A dedicated parkland versus undedicated, what's the ramifications of that? I mean, so if something is undedicated, does that mean it can't be touched by the city, or that the city can develop it just like you would any parkland?
From my understanding is that that parcel is under the control, it's not considered part of the park system. So those 10 acres are not parkland. Now, the city can elect to do something else with it.
So for example, making trails on it, finishing off the Bixby Hills Park, could they treat it just like they would any other parkland from a development by making trails or finishing off park, make plantings, that type of thing?
Well, what I can do is I can address how we handled the 10 acres within the interim park concepts, which we're going to talk about next month. We didn't put any trails through there because we didn't know what that use would be. We didn't want to put a trail in there and have to remove the trail that people were getting used to service. We have to cap that part of the landfill, so it has to be finished. It will be, planted the same way as the rest of the landfill, so it won't look necessarily different from the rest of Bixby Park Hills. But at this point in time, until we're directed otherwise, we're not planning to put any trails through there. But on the other hand, we're also not planning to fence it off. So, Darren, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, I think you covered it.
Okay, Commissioner Cromie.
I want to thank you so much for this presentation. I think it's really important for our commission to stay aware of what's going on with this acreage, and so much has been happening. You gave a really great timeline, and I really appreciate your presentation. I think what's important to me is that we acknowledge that what was expected to happen with Measure E has not happened. So far, the vote was, shall 10 acres of existing parkland in Bixby Park be undedicated for the exclusive purpose of building a processing facility for yard trimmings, food waste, and other organic material. And the idea behind this was to get green energy from anaerobic digestion. It's a very important part. It's anaerobic digestion, which is going to give us that green energy. And I think you updated us quite well on the findings that so far that hasn't happened. And so the proponents of Measure E were very hopeful that it would. The opponents said, we don't think the technology is there. And we have 6 more years to figure it out, but because so far it's not looking like it is there, I'm just hoping that somehow our commission can, over time, through some kind of direction between staff helping us figure out how to do this, not lose sight of that parkland. This is to support what Emily Renzel said, is that we have a lot of development going on in Bixby Park. There's a lot of interest in our community to get those trails figured out, to make it a rich place for people to be. And we've waited a long time. And sort of as we plan that, I think it's our responsibility on the commission to not lose sight of that parkland, if you carve out the 3.8 out of the 10, that's still leaving 6.2 acres to think about. And again, you're going to have to remind me again. I try to keep track of all this, and I read a lot of the reports. Can you just say once again what that 3.8 would be carved out for provisionally? I know nothing is set, but can you just give one sentence on that?
Sure. Yeah, the reason the 3.8 acres was carved out of the whole was that there was no fill underneath, so there's no actual garbage underneath those 3.8 acres, and we wouldn't have to excavate the garbage and build a retaining wall, which was originally the possibility with using all the 10 acres. So the 3.8 acres was what we always called the relatively flat portion of that land.
Okay, so now I understand. So should anything go there, the idea is it should really only go on the 3.8. If anything goes there at all, so that is more of a rationale for us to really keep our eye on the 6.2 acres. I think that land is a really important gateway to Bixby Park. So when you look at the map, it just sits right there as people are going to enter the park. I just think we don't want to lose sight of that. I also want to make a point that when this vote went forth, the idea was that 10 acres to be used sort of independently for the production of green energy. If we can't do that, I personally think we have to be very careful about setting that site up as some kind of support land for the processing plant. Just because it happens to be next to it doesn't mean that we have any mandate whatsoever to have this be this undedicated parkland to somehow be some auxiliary space to support what's going on at the regional processing, the RF, what do we call that? The sewage treatment center. So I really would like us to separate this as we study this on the commission, and I really hope that you'll continue to come back to us. And I also want to say I think the city is doing very good work, independent, totally independent of Measure E. I know it was a goal of the city to get rid of the incinerator. That's huge. So I want to congratulate the powers behind that to push forward with all these incredibly sensible things that needed to take place, which have really no bearing on our parkland and are going to proceed independently of that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? Nope. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Great presentation.
We now move on to the 7.7 acres. We do have one speaker, Jerry Hearn.
Thank you very much, members of the commission. Jerry Hearn, resident of Portola Valley. In the interest of disclosure, I've been involved with the Actera Nursery and with Actera, both since their inception. However, tonight I'm speaking as a private citizen in regards to the recommendation in front of you tonight. There are three elements to it. The first one I want to comment individually on each one of them. The first one regarding the hydrologic study, I think that's an excellent idea. It's in line with the natural environment element of the general plan. In my experience working with the master plan process for the parks, there seems to be a great interest for water features, and this could turn out to be an interesting water feature. And thirdly, as mentioned in there, there's some potential for steelhead trout that do exist in the downstream end of Los Trancos Creek, which this empties into. So I think that's a good idea, and I fully support that. The second item is about the closure of the park temporarily until the hydrologic study is done. I think that makes perfect sense. If you've been out there, you know what the area looks like. It's kind of the flat area, which is the only really accessible area, is pretty uninteresting at this point. There doesn't seem to be a whole lot of interest to go out there. However, I would consider that you might think about making it available for tours every once in a while, as was done before. Although those were not very well attended, I think it's not a bad idea if people want to go out there and take a look at it. The third part, which has to do with the nursery lease, when I first read about the idea of having it be on an annual basis, that kind of set me back a little bit, because I hark back to when we were trying to find a place for the nursery, how long it took us to find it, how long it took us to put all the pieces together, and the idea that in a year's time or a half a year's time, depending on whatever happened, we could be looking for a new place. I think that would be a real challenge. However, with the option that it's a 4-year renewable lease with both parties agreeing to it, and given the excellent relationship that we have established with the staff over the many years here, I think that we would be able to work with that, because I'm sure that it would not be a surprise sprung on us, and we would have plenty of time to make a change if we needed to. So in general, I just want to say that I support the recommendation. I appreciate all the work that staff has put into thinking about this. And I look forward to seeing that 7.7 acres put to better use than it has been in the past, with the exception, of course, of the Actera Nursery, which is a fabulous use. So, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Darren, it's yours.
Excellent. Good evening. I'm here tonight seeking your recommendation to council on how to proceed with that 7.7 acre parcel of parkland at Foothills Park. A quick summary of where we left off was that council had dedicated this land in August of 2014 and directed staff to work with the commission to figure out the best use for the land. After the ranger-led tours and the public meeting, staff brought the issue to the commission to discuss it on January 27th, last month. At the meeting, there was general consensus on how to move forward. The first kind of a general agreement was to fund and implement the hydrology study for the Buckeye Creek. And there was note that this should be completed before making any recommendations whatsoever on how to use the land for any other purpose. The second was to renew that Actera nursery lease for a short-term basis, so that the city has flexibility to act on those recommendations that would come about through some hydrology study. I've recommended a year-to-year lease, as you saw in the staff report, with the option to renew for 4 additional years pending that mutual agreement and the city's approval. The third consensus was to keep that parcel closed to the public, which is status quo until the hydrology study is complete. I would like to thank the commission and the ad hoc committee for excellent guidance, really clear directions and assistance with this process. And that concludes my presentation. I'm available for any questions, comments.
Okay, questions?
Do the ad hoc committee members want to add anything different from or additional from last month?
Okay. Okay, so this is, go ahead.
I was going to go ahead and move that we approve the recommendation.
Okay. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second. Oh, sorry.
Oh, Commissioner Cromie?
I just had a question. Am I allowed to ask that?
Yeah.
Motion's on the table.
Okay, so thank you, Darren, for all your hard work on this, as well as thank you to our ad hoc committee. I think this is a really good proposal. I just wanted to make sure, I wanted a sense of what you're thinking in terms of time frame. And the reason I'm asking this question is I know part of the proposal is to keep this land out of reach to the public. And anytime we do have parkland, I think as a commission, we have to be very mindful of that. And, you know, I think it's part of our, I take that very seriously as far as cutting off access. And so I know that in the past, a couple council members have asked if while we're figuring this all out, we can have access, and we've bantered that about. And I think that there are some good arguments in this proposal for why we cannot do that, considering cost and safety, to mention two of them. But can you just speak to this issue a little bit? Because I would hate for this to, you know, we've been waiting decades for this, and I just would hate for it to go on and on. So can you give me some sense of what you're thinking in terms of the timeline?
My hope for the timeline is that the capital improvement project is approved and we were able to have access to the funds come July 1st. And once the funds are available, jump on this immediately, go out to bid, see if we can find a good consultant to take on the hydrology study. The part of the time frame that I'm uncertain about is how long it'll take to get the hydrology study completed. It would really be part of that pre-bid proposal where I'm hearing from consultants what they think is necessary to fully see it. Do they need to see it through a full rain cycle? In some preliminary outreach, we know that there are some contractors who have studied the hydrology in the general area. They might have a good enough understanding that could truncate that process a little bit rather than having to see it over an extended period of time. But that's an unknown at this point. So I need more details to come through the outreach to these contractors and people who study hydrology. That said, I could not foresee it going beyond a year.
Okay, and then just as far as how this is phrased here, it says keep the 7.7 acre parcel closed until after the hydrology study is completed. And we know that once a study is completed, then we have to study the findings of the study, figure out where we want to go with that. So I might try to make a friendly amendment to this, or I wonder if we can have some kind of clarification about that, because I would just hate, as we study it further, I wanted, I guess, more clarification on the statement.
I really understand what you mean. I think it bears elaboration, and I think it would be, I think the right thing is, after that study is complete, it comes back to the commission, and then we can look at all those options we vetted, and somewhere in there, it could open early, right? Because now you've got an understanding of what the implications of the hydrology are, or it could remain closed. So the reason I guess I left it partially open is we know that the process will be after the hydrology study, it comes back to the commission for review and working through that process. But somewhere in there it could open, and maybe not. It would really be at the commission's recommendation, which is what council asked of you. So I could add, we could add language, or if you think that suffices, we could leave it as is.
Yeah, I just, as a commission, I'd like a chance when it's on the table. It sounds like it's already on the table. I don't know the logistics of when I bring that up for discussion, but I would like some guidance on having our commission talk about the wording of number 2. Is this a proper time to do that? I want to know if anyone else on the commission, what would I propose?
Here. Do you have a suggestion for what you would like it to say? Do you have wording to propose?
Let me think a minute. How about, I'd like to say, once the study is completed, so keep it closed until it's completed. Once it's completed, bring it back in a timely manner so we can reevaluate that. I don't know quite how to word that. I feel like it's just a little bit too open-ended. Does anyone else share my concern?
Actually, no, because it's not only with regard to the hydrologic study. Obviously, you mentioned the safety issue with regard to the parcel. There's also a private resident, if you recall, that has 3 open sides. So from a public-private perspective, we can't just open it to the public because then they'll be ending up trespassing. The other issue I want to bring up is after the hydrologic study and the conclusion of the master plan, having all of that data as well as the creek information, like structurally the creek issue, kind of folding all of that data together and then being able to systematically make decisions that are informed based on what this because it's really 2.1 acres as we talked about on that's buildable potentially. And so I think that that's very clear. Keep the parcel closed until after the study, and then we can deal with it at that point. But I think the study is only one piece of it because it's also about the master plan.
Well, my concern would be that you could infer that first sentence says that once the study is complete, we'll open it. That'd be my only concern about misinterpretation. And so if we want to change that to say shall remain closed at least until after the hydrology study is complete, that would say that we don't have any obligation to open it once the hydrological study is complete.
Okay, I mean, that's possible. I mean, Commissioner Knopper just said 2 things that I am not sure I personally agree with. I don't think it's really been established that only 2.1 acres of that are usable because we don't know that for certain. There are ways to build trails on, I mean, it's all predicated on the flatness, and we know that you can build trails in areas that are not flat. So I don't agree with that.
But what's wrong with leaving it open as it is? Because it seemed to me that the language that you added didn't change the facts here, which is it's going to stay closed until the hydrologic study is complete. So I'm not sure what your language does because it doesn't say it's going to open. It's just an extra sentence, just as I heard it anyway. Because all we're saying with this, the way it's written, is that it's going to stay closed if we approve this recommendation until we get the results of the hydrologic study. After that, we could make new recommendations the next day, I guess, technically, the way this is written.
Okay, people are...
You have too many mics open.
If that's the interpretation, that's fine with me. I like the idea once it's complete that it can come back to us immediately and we can try to open it. I wouldn't vote for something that's going to be closed indefinitely because I think that the safety measures are workable. I think you can, I personally believe that you can overcome that and open this up. There are ways to mitigate the dangers to the public. And so if we weren't going to, so I think eventually our commission is going to have to deal with this question of what we're doing next. So as long as so I interpret this the way that I guess Commissioner Lowing just stated it, that as soon as it's complete, at any point it can come back to us and we can say we can open it.
Would it be at all helpful if I added text to the staff report that goes to council to just make that abundantly clear that this is the process that the commission and staff intend to follow? Everything we just enumerated, that after this is done, immediately after, staff will bring this back to the commission, and one of the things that may result is of opening it sooner rather than later, but we'll have the full breadth of information from the master plan, the hydrology study. We'll combine it to take the most prudent process forward.
Right. I like that personally because I'm not believing that it's impossible to open this land up. I actually believe it is possible, but I just think hydrology study takes precedence in my mind, and so that's why I would vote in favor of this. But I do think it's possible to open up this land while we're studying it further.
So without an amendment, we go back to the motion. We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. It passes. Thank you, Darren. Okay. Ad hoc updates. Are there any ad hocs that have updates?
Yes. Commissioner Cromie and I met regarding the Lucy Evans Balin's Interpretive Center. We met with Darren Anderson and regarding the site, and then with John Aiken to discuss the site and the CIPs that are available, as well as future steps regarding programming. So the 3 CIPs that are currently in process are a feasibility study to determine how to repair and replace the boardwalk. That RFP, I assume, went out. It was to go out last month. And this study will complete in the fall, and design can begin soon after, pending council approval. Cost of construction for the boardwalk will be determined during the study and further refined in the design stage. The second is the project for general improvements to the interpretive center. The scope of this project is decking, railing, structural framing as needed, exterior wood siding, flooring, cabinetry, and doors. And that is interior as well as exterior, because the flooring is continuous on the exterior of the building as well as inside. There's $100,000 budgeted for design in the current fiscal year and $405,000 scheduled for construction in fiscal year of 2016. This RFP did go out in January, and design will begin this spring. Public Works had slated to do public input in the fall. We added that we should have Parks and Rec Commission feedback prior to the public input phase on that process. And the third one is improvements to the Interpretive Center exhibits, but this also includes the outdoor signage. And that project is funded at $56,000, scheduled for fiscal year of 2017. We discussed that that was insufficient budget for exhibits, but it's the starting point, and then we'll be going back after that. So that is the current status. And if Commissioner Cromie, did you have anything to add?
Yes, thank you. So that's so where we want to go. We consider what the next step would be in this is to bring John Aiken to present to us on these CIPs, with the main focus on the third one that Commissioner Ashland just mentioned, which is the Interpretive Center exhibits. Because what we brought up in our meeting with John Aiken is that we're very interested in discussing programming and making sure that the facility is sustaining future programming. And when we asked about that, he said that he thinks that the CIP, the second CIP that Commissioner Ashland mentioned, will probably cover needs for refiguration, if any, in the interior space for programming. But what was not covered is this concept of the exhibits. So that's where John Aiken sees a deficit, and he felt that we could actually be useful in examining that as a commission. And he said it broadly pertains to exhibits across the Baylands Open Space Preserve, that if we want to look at this as an integrated endeavor. So there's a lot of food for thought that he brought up in our meeting, and I think our commission would have some good input on that. And because we have members of our commission that get involved in the CIP process, I think it'd be nice for us to process some of this information through a presentation, and then decide if we want to try for any advocacy within the CIP process on this topic. So the outcome of our meeting is I'm really hoping that we will bring this to the commission as an agenda item.
So that all makes sense to me. The sequencing of when, to look at the exhibit CIP, I've talked to John Aiken about this as well, because, the boardwalk and knowing whether we're going to have a boardwalk or not, or is it going to change in some way, and the facility and the walls and other things related to the second CIP that you spoke about. Both of those will inform what we might do with the exhibit program. And so want to be sure we get those going sort of first, and then integrate the exhibit CIP at the appropriate time. I agree that $56,000 is not enough really for what we would want to do there. But to the point about exhibits, if you've been out there recently, there's 4 exhibits on the exterior, but they're sitting on railing that's pretty old and falling apart, and all the rails are rusted. So those things need to be understood in terms of what needs to be fixed before we can really design exhibits and how they might be installed, as an example.
And then that big picture concept. So
Yeah.
we'd want him to sort of cover everything.
Right, correct.
I mean, any Lucy Evans improvements, is that all going to be funded through CIPs, or is that also, could it be external funds?
Could be external funds. These 3 CIPs are all from within the CIP budget and the infrastructure reserve. So we don't have any external funding.
Are there any friends, like, is there Friends of the Bayland? Or is it just Friends of Parks? Okay.
Yeah, we talked about the need for something like that too.
Okay.
That there's not a friends group associated with that facility at this point.
Specifically, we have Friends of the Palo Alto Parks, and we have the environmental volunteers, of course, that are out there.
Let's talk offline and figure out,
Okay.
Let's bring this up in a future meeting.
And, this has a lot of visibility right now, which is very important. So we want to, Commissioner Ashland and I, in talking to John Aiken, we all agreed that we need to act now with a vision because of the visibility and the momentum. This is the time to do it if we want to advocate for any kind of global envisioning, when it comes to something like exhibits.
Any other ad hocs? Okay. Rob, did you have any announcements?
It's late, so I'll just be quick. We do have our summer camp and aquatics registration coming up. We did have a fair over the weekend at Mitchell Park, which was a lot of fun. A lot of parents and children attended that and met some of the staff. But by 5 p.m. this Friday, submissions need to be in so we can process the summer camp program. Wanted to give an update on the CIP program generally, that Commission helped work with staff in defining priorities, and so that's moving through the process. We still have Buckeye Creek, of course, a high priority, ballpark, Baylands comprehensive conservation plan, I said that right, is in there as well, and hopefully that will get approved, which actually could inform exhibits. And also Cubberley is now coming into play because we have an agreement with the school district that defines specific funding to support the Cubberley campus. So there's a few things that I'd love to see fixed there, like the tennis courts as an example. They're really in bad shape, and there's a number of other things that we'd like to just get fixed up at Cubberley, as well as, of course, starting the master planning process for the future of Cubberley.
What about that fire hazard at Foothills? Was that put in the CIPs from a different
No,
group?
it's a good, interesting question. So it was requested actually that it wouldn't be put in the capital budget, but rather be put forward as an operating budget request between Public Works, Community Services, and Fire, and we're submitting it that way, and it's in the mix, so we'll see if it gets approved. So that's it.
What's the status on El Camino Park?
Status on El Camino Park is it's moving forward. I believe there was something had begun on site. I don't know that we've had a specific groundbreaking that I'm aware of, at least. But moving forward, hope to have it completed by the end of the calendar year with an open facility. So, long time coming. That's happening.
And how about the Mayfield turf? There was some talk about, I think we said that they were looking at a February timeframe to start the turf. I think that's been pushed back.
Yeah, I think it's on schedule. We're a bit behind, I should say, first of all, but the most recent schedule is we're sticking with that. Both fields need to be replaced in terms of the turf.
And they're doing it sequentially.
Right.
So we only lose one field at a time.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay, agenda items for next.
Can I request an update on Magical Bridge next time, if possible? I know there's been a lot of progress there, so any word you have on the opening?
Yeah, that'll be good timing for, by the end of March, I think it's intended to be open if all goes to plan.
How about Scott Park?
I have to get back to you on Scott Park.
Okay.
I'm not sure what the status is on that.
Okay. Okay, agenda items for next time. Well, maybe you should talk about the retreat first.
So the retreat we have scheduled for March 20th from noon to 3 at Mitchell Park Community Center.
We're not doing Foothills.
Not this time. Was
Okay.
it not available? Or we just went with Mitchell?
Okay.
It's more convenient for Catherine, so we're at Mitchell.
Okay. And
And we can, if there's a desire for the commission to be somewhere else or really away from down, we could do that, but
it's a
Mitchell's
new
nice.
facility. In some ways, it's nice to use the new facility.
Yeah, I agree. So
if there's things wrong with it, we can
keeps
complain.
Catherine
yes.
happy too, so that's always good. So the question will be, what do we do at that retreat? I think there's two possibilities. One is a typical retreat that we do, where we take some time to really reflect on the year past and the year that's ahead, and try and plan out the year and priorities, and see if we can sort of set the agenda to some degree for the next several months. The alternative is to focus on the Parks Master Plan, and that really depends on how far MIG can get with staff in preparing the matrix and the data and the binders, so that we really can have a productive meeting. And so we'll have to see. We have a little bit of time, I guess about a month, to prepare for that. But one of those, and if the commission has an interest, that we certainly can. I suspect we're not going to be ready by March 20th to do that sort of deep dive in the matrix and the summary of needs, is my sense, because there's just so much information, and I don't want to go forward with it unless it's really ready and well thought through.
I am concerned, though, that if we wait too long and they filled it out the wrong way too much, then they'll say, well, we put so much into this, you can't change it now.
There is, that's it, and that's a fair point too. So that's something that perhaps, we can talk about over the next month, to see where things are at, and you can also talk with MIG, and we can make the call as we get a little closer.
Okay.
But everybody's got it on their calendar. Either way, it'll be,
We will have a retreat on the 20th.
Yeah.
And, we will set the content, and then Rob will send something out by email.
Okay.
Depending what the content is. But we'll prepare for the regular retreat, but I think the highest priority is master plan. So if we're anywhere close to having something, we should do the master plan.
But if that happens, then we're going to put the retreat content into one of our subsequent meetings, correct? As opposed to set another retreat to do the real retreat?
I guess we can talk about that at the retreat.
Unless the retreat is the 20th, right?
Yes. But if we do, on the 20th, if we're discussing the master plan, then we, as part of that, can talk about when we want the regular retreat content.
Right, but it's not going to be on the 20th if that happens. We can't squeeze in both the retreat agenda and essentially a study session on the master plan.
So we can add that to the agenda, assuming the master plan is ready. We can add to the agenda on the 24th of March what we want to do with a future retreat, I suppose.
Or even on the 20th, too, we could talk about it.
Okay, that's true.
Either way.
And then...
So you're going to have two agendas ready for the 20th, like two game plans, and then whatever one...
I think, Pat and I will have to work. We'll get inputs from people on the path forward for the commission, and we'll put that on the shelf if master plan comes in. Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah.
Okay.
In terms of putting in things on the table for the retreat, if it were to be the planning the year retreat on the 20th. I'm not sure how the Brown Act weighs in on that. If more than 2 commissioners have thoughts about it, then they need to send it to you,
staff,
not to...
yeah.
Send it to Rob.
Right, so everybody should do that. Send your comments or suggestions for the retreat to Rob and not to Keith.
Yep.
Directly.
Can you frame that a little bit more when you say suggestions? What do you mean exactly as far as the flow? Are we going to base it on past retreats? I'm a little confused.
I mean, in past retreats, we've talked about what ad hocs we would have and what priorities we would have. If there's other path forward, any guidance that you want to give, that you want to talk about, give it to Rob or come prepared to talk about it. If it's just your 2 cents, you can give that at the retreat.
Right, because I've thought that when we're actually at the retreat, we discuss quite a few things as a group, as far as, we traditionally will form subcommittees, we'll decide which ones to carry forth and whether we need any more.
I think the only exception is if it's anything where Rob has to gather data, or one of us has to gather data, then we want to know about that before the meeting so we can get any supporting material.
Can you just give an example of what you mean? Like, for instance?
If we're talking about, say, summer camps, and you want some information about the summer camps so we can talk about making different types of summer camps or marketing them better, then you would want some information from Rob about how well the summer camps went this year, how the sign-ups went, what was popular, what was not popular. If we get up there or get over to Mitchell Park and we're inside and you want to talk about the summer camps, then we don't have the data. So I think the only reason that you'd want to send stuff to Rob is if some preparation has to go into that before the retreat.
Right, and I think that's fair, although I would add that we don't really want to work any issue at the retreat necessarily. We're really trying to put things on the table that commissioners or staff think have a policy implication of some type that we might want to weigh in on as a commission and to advise council on. So if you have those kinds of...
Or if someone has format changes compared to the default of previous years, that would be fair game to also forward to you.
Sure.
But I think, Commissioner Cromie, what we're saying is that we would just go with the normal default as we've usually done, unless someone has, a great idea that the chair and the vice decide we should make this shift.
Right, I was just hoping people could bring those great ideas up right now at our meeting so we can, that's traditionally what we've done, so I guess I'm a little bit confused in this sort of outsourcing proposal. I feel like this is a time for people to bring up ideas.
Sorry, I think I complicated the issue by raising it. We don't have it on the agenda today to discuss the retreat, and we don't even know when we're going to hold the retreat. So since we're in this kind of plan A, plan B scenario for the 20th, I just wanted to remind everyone that if we do end up having the retreat on the 20th, be cautious of the Brown Act.
Okay, now I understand where you're coming from. So just to clarify, I thought we had a date and a time. Is that not true?
Yeah, we do. March 20th, noon to 3, and we'll provide lunch.
But March 20th, we will have a retreat. And the only issue is what's the content of the retreat? Is it the traditional content or is it just master plan? And we might do 3 hours on the master plan.
Right.
So we're going to have to notice this.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And so maybe in the past, we've just neglected to put it onto the agenda. And in the past, I think we've often discussed it at our meeting prior to the retreat. So that I was just a little bit.
Retreat planning, I think we've.
Right,
yeah.
so that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, agenda items for next month, for the 24th this is.
We have a Bixby Park plan.
Yes, I just wanted to comment that Darren is working very hard on that, so we have an ad hoc subcommittee that needs to meet before we present that, and we were almost ready to meet. Now we're hopefully going to meet really soon. That's Commissioner Rechdel and myself, so...
Okay.
He has the feedback from the consultant now, so we can talk about it.
Right, so I think we're ready to set our meeting, so he's ready.
Okay, so I assume master plan is going to come up.
Parks master plan will be back.
And can we invite John Aiken to come and speak about the Baylands CIP? Is that, if we have room in the meeting?
I don't think he'll have a whole lot of information by next month, is my sense, because this is related to the exhibits specifically, the exhibits of CIP?
When Commissioner Ashland and I spoke with him, he said he made it sound like he was ready to come as soon as we were able to have him. So if you could just talk to him about that.
Okay.
What is the schedule for determining CIPs?
Well, we're in the process of getting the new 5-year plan approved, which we run on a fiscal year from July 1 to June 30th. So now we're doing 2016 to 2020, a 5-year plan, and trying to get the first year, 2016, the actual budget approved. The other 4 years are just a plan.
Okay, so we submitted a bunch for this coming fiscal year.
Right, and we're still in the process of getting those approved.
And that goes up one level, and then they throw some out and keep some, and then they submit that to a higher level to the council.
And it goes up several levels. And so far, all of our priorities remain in there, which is good news.
So it's made through the first cut, and now it's just going to council?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
And then after July 1, after the budget has been approved, we can start over and evaluating the next round.
Okay. What is the date for this council to approve it?
I saw the schedule this week. I'll have to send it out. I know the community services budget is scheduled to go to the finance committee. Are you on the finance committee, council member? Yeah, I think it's May 5th for the CSD operating budget. The capital budget goes on a different schedule. I'll have to send that calendar out to you all.
Okay, so we will not have any news about CIPs at next month?
No.
So we only have 2 agenda items so far for next month.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll have to check with Darren and with Peter to see if there are any park projects that need to come forward.
I mean, the other option is if the agenda is looking thin next month, we could do the master plan that evening, I mean the 24th, at a regular meeting with,
we could.
or have a 2-hour chunk out of it, or whatever, some big chunk of the evening meeting, and then just have a retreat on the 20th, our normal retreat.
We could do that. It feels to me like it's a really big discussion and something that might lend itself to not being in this format. Okay. And not going late into the evening.
Okay.
When do we get the revenue report? That's part of the master plan? Because that's an important piece that we haven't seen yet.
So the cost and prices, I haven't seen that either. I think they're working on that. We received today the survey results, a summary of the survey results. I haven't read it yet, so that's the latest I've gotten from MIG.
So is that, can we talk, will we just, so as far as when we go, the next time we talk about the master plan, do we have a topic that we're expecting to talk about? Like, would we be talking about those survey results? That's a pretty meaty topic.
On the 24th? Yeah.
Yeah.
The survey results would be in there. That alone could be enough of a topic for the master plan, I think.
Okay. So the only thing left is adjournment. Unless, did you have any more comments, or? Okay. Do I have a motion?
I move we adjourn.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay. Meeting adjourned.